We record this through YouTube, so this allows other people to watch it. Right. We record this through YouTube, so this allows other people to watch. It's my voice coming back on me. Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome today. We'll start in the next few minutes. We're just waiting for a couple of other people to join, but we'll probably crack off at 2 right on time. We'll just hang out in the background. Please note that you can message us on the chat, so don't be shy to leave comments. Q&As will happen at the end of each session, so we'll have a look at those questions, and then I'll take them to the speakers and we'll discuss those. And as mentioned, we'll start in a minute or so. Right, give it a few more seconds. All right. Okay, great. We're going to crack off. Welcome, everyone, to the second webinar that we're running as part of the Prosper Africa AGOA and GSB eligibility customer support services. This is a program that we've been running since the beginning of the year. And these webinars are knowledge-based sessions that help people either looking to import into the US or export from Africa into the US certain products from Africa. And it really is a deep dive into what you have to expect when wanting to do so. As per last time, our first webinar, we've got some great speakers that have joined us. We like to do these with some very practical experience. So we'll have someone that does something about that, then someone very knowledgeable in a certain space, with today being product classification and regulation focused and certification focused. We will have someone from talking about FDA from Registrar Corp. And then we'll have our 2 experts that have been helping on this project with us, Ruan King and Eckhard from Trelec, giving us some insight. Just for you, those of you, again, if you're coming from other parts and you need to be want to hear this in French or Portuguese, there's a way to do that. Go through and click there. And then choose your language. So I hope you get that from my funny slides that I've put up there for you. As mentioned, so I'll firstly go through the customer service program and outline what's happened with it so far and where we're up to, how that's developing. Then we will when we'll have Audrey Williams from Kailicha Cookies giving us a presentation and real insight on how they've done some work into the US. Coley Anderson is joining us from the US, from Registrar Corp, who are the leading company registering people for FDA. So years of experience there, and Coley does a lot of work with making sure people understand how that is possible, and she's going to help us with that today. And then Ruan, as I mentioned, Ruan King from King Cargo has been helping us with a lot of logistics questions with our customer service support, and Eckhard Naumann from Trelec, the people who run the AGOA.info website, which is information about AGOA, will join us a bit later to give us some information on making sure you know how to classify your products before you start sending them out. We will do a Q&A between each session. So as mentioned, put notes on the chat. Don't be shy. We love questions. They make it much more exciting. It changes the angle of the conversation as well. So please, don't hesitate to put some questions on there and we'll ask them at the end. If we start not sure of certain ones, and then we'll ask you to come on, explain a little bit more, but we will try to handle those as best we can. But it's just, we will be taking questions from the chat and not from people turning on their cameras and asking those questions. This will last around about 2.5 hours. So everyone's sort of speaking between 30 minutes and an hour and a bit. With Coley Anderson will be our main speaker for today, so she'll be taking up most of that time. So to give you a little bit of insight before I start getting our great speakers to speak. So we Catalyze are running the Prosper Africa Customer Services Program. This involves us speaking to a lot of different companies across Africa and giving them advice on utilizing AGOA and eligibility. And really doing the services behind that, and ensuring that we understand what the problem is, understand what the company is all about, and making sure that we are directing them into the right service providers as well that are helping us, the experts, the likes of Ruan and Trelec, Eckhard from Trelec, and making sure that we've got the right information going back to people. Then it's clear and concise and sorts out the problem straight away. Besides this, we have been doing association training sessions. So this is our second one. There will be 4 of them, and we'll go through that. We are doing a lot of PR and marketing. So a big part of this is to get people to utilize AGOA. So we're really driving that. Don't miss out on the opportunity, and know that it is available to people, and it's something that we should be capitalizing on. And then I'll just run through a couple of other Catalyze projects that we run. As mentioned, our customer support service, a great team behind it. Very simple. There's a simple form to fill out that we just run through. Our team gets back to you and just assesses what you put in and make sure we understand what is needed. Please, this is a service for pretty much anyone looking to get product between Africa and the US. So we're looking at assisting buyers. We've so far assisted over 90 companies on this, but we've got lots more to do. And this is live and active until December this year. So please, there's a lot of questions with AGOA, a lot of requirements as well. So this is your time to utilize this. It's a free of charge service. Contact us and we will support you with that. But basically, we'll assess what you're doing. We'll have a look at it. If it's requiring us to set up an appointment with you and run through it, we'll do that. But there'll be a lot of back and forth and clarifying the issue. And at that stage, if it's something that needs to go to an expert, we'll send it off to them and we'll get some insight from them. And we'll come back to you on that, all the way to the point where we really can't sort it out. We will set up some kind of a Zoom call with an expert, and we'll run through that with you and make sure that we totally get to the bottom of your issue. Just on the experts, as mentioned, Ruan from King Cargo and Eckhard Naumann from Trelec are putting a lot of effort into this for us. It's both experts in their field. Ruan has been doing loads and getting South African products to international markets for many, many years across multiple sectors. So a lot of experience and hurdles that he's had to jump in the past. And obviously Eckhard has written what the Bible on AGOA, which is AGOA.info. loads of information there, understands exactly what the complexities are of a GOA and what things you have to do to ensure they are covered. As mentioned, we are going through these practical webinars. So we did logistics and planning in May. Today is the product classification, regulation, and certification. But then we have 2 others. So encourage you to join those as well. One is industry requirements specific for utilizing a GOA. So we will go through that a little bit industry more specific. So most likely we'll be looking at sort of the healthcare space as well, cosmetics. We've done quite a bit on food already. So we'll look into that space. And then lastly, we'll be looking at costings and quotings for export. So this is always very key. How do you price yourself when you go into a new market? It's super important to get right from the beginning. Other than that, yes, as mentioned, we are doing all kinds of PR. So there's an animated video that we're halfway through, just showing you how to navigate the program, as well as utilize the goa.info to effectively get information. We'll be editing a lot of these training session videos as well. So those will be a little bit more concise and easier to get to, but just note that all of these are recorded. You can watch the whole thing, and they are posted onto the event link afterwards. So keep an eye out for that if you need to go back on it. And then we are, as said, we are doing a lot of PR through social platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, and just really pushing the use of a GOA over this time. Other than that, just a little bit of background on Catalyze. We do take international pavilions to international shows all around the world. We are at the moment putting something together for Summer Fancy Food. We will have a booth on there on the USAID pavilion. We will be taking and supporting quite a few African brands at that event. But other than that, we also worked with Department of Agriculture's Department of Trade and Industry and helped them with pavilions at international shows, from everything from booking their space to building their stands to doing B2B meeting programs. Those have been really, really successful over the last 11 years. We are also doing a lot of B2B matchmaking and hosted buying programs. So B2B matchmaking, we do both virtually and in person, where we source the right buyers for exporters and put them into meetings with them. These are paid for programs that various associations pay us to run, and some individual companies as well. Very successful. Every time we do these programs, they end up in deals coming back. So they're quite exciting, but they are very different to international events. They go by the less is more ideal, that we, instead of saying we're going to introduce you to 1,000 people, we introduce you to 5 to 10 key people, but those 5 to 10 are based on who you, based on your profile and who you usually are working with. So then we go out into market and find a similar batch of buyers. So those are great. We also do hosted buying programs. We bring in buyers into South Africa, into various events around South Africa. These are also great, but we are open to doing those into other regions in Africa as well. So great programs to get people on the ground and actually seeing that, there is infrastructure in Africa. It's a great market. There's opportunity. People are extremely friendly and really wanting to do business with the world, and the products are awesome that are coming from Africa. Amazing ingredients. So that's a really exciting programs. Then we do our own industry events as well, 2 of them. One is Africa Games Week, which is the largest event in Africa, largest event in the world for African developers gathering. So we get about 250 African developers each year, and video games industry professionals attending those. And then we run Ocean Innovation Africa, which is the leading ocean economy event in Africa. So those shows have both been going 5 years, very well established, and really growing from strength to strength at the moment. And then we were, for the last 3 years, been running Engage Trade Africa, where we bring the right people together from different parts of Africa and introduce them to South African and US buyers, really, and looking to give African regional exporters the opportunity to springboard into the South African market and get access to it, as well as South African and African exporters to get into contact with US buyers. So we ran that virtually in 2021 and 2022, and then in person earlier this year in March 2023, and great results from that. What's really exciting through Engage Trade Africa is we have found that a lot of South African companies are sometimes a bit skeptical about buying product and ingredients from Africa, and they've really opened their eyes up to this. A lot of product from Africa is going direct into Europe and into the US, and mainly because South African product companies have been a little bit hesitant from buying from Africa. But this has really opened up through this program. So very exciting, lovely to see lots more trade happening between Africa. Intra-Africa trade is key to the growth of Africa. Great. So that's me for this morning, and I'll be up and joining you guys with the Q&As as we develop. But our first speaker today is Audrey Williams. She comes from a company called Khayelitsha Cookies. She was actually, we took a group out to Khayelitsha Cookies during Engage Trade Africa this year. And we did a site visit, and it was wonderful to be walking around and seeing the machinery and the team that are producing amazing cookies out of there. Audrey Williams, she's the managing director and co-owner of Khayelitsha Cookies. She's also the proud founder of You Cookie Company, which is their export brand, which they are exporting into the US. So it's quite important that we listen to how she got there and what restrictions she's had in the market and how she's dealt with them and got over them. But yeah, Khayelitsha Cookies, if you don't know about them, are an amazing company. They actually create work for unemployed women from the informal settlements in and around Cape Town. So it's a beautiful story, hard fought as well, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from Audrey, but yeah, a great story, and great to see that they've got to the heights and managed to export product into the US. So I'll hand over to Audrey now, who's going to be giving us information on getting registrations correct in the US and preparing for these as well. Audrey,
thank you so much, Rex. And everybody that's here today. Yes, I hope that you can actually learn out of our mistakes, because it's very expensive school fees to go and make it yourself over and over again. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Here we go. So who we are, what we are, and what we do. So we basically create employment for previously unemployed women, and we teach them to hand bake and hand pack cookies in our facility. Now, a lot of these ladies are unschooled, meaning unskilled, meaning they cannot read, write, or speak English. So by worldly standards, it makes them unemployable. So we decided that we need to help these women, and how we help them is by teaching them to hand bake and hand pack cookies in our internationally food safety accredited facility. So we are FSSC accredited. Tie that to your ear, very important before you start exporting food products. And we had to go over to picture training, OSA training, verbal exams. And most of the ladies, when they start working here, it means that we have to help them to open up a bank account. We need to teach them basic skills of HR, how to conduct yourself in the workplace, how to work with your finances. And this is basically where I gave up my corporate career in 2005, doing very well for myself. And I gave up a JSE listed corporate that I worked for to go into this little small facility with 3 house ovens and 4 staff members. But when I entered this facility, I saw a vision of 1,000 ladies plus baking. realizing that behind each woman that's unemployed are 5 to 7 dependents who go hungry every single night. And working with an outreach that we did at the Brooklyn Chest TB Hospital, 1 in every 5 children in South Africa die due to malnutrition before the age of 5. And that is shocking statistics. And that is my heart's desires, to truly make a difference, to enable women to feed their families at the end of the day. And the only way to do that is to teach them and train them a skill. And the motto of our business is actually quite easy. For every 1,000 cookies we bake in a day, we sustain 1 woman's job. Currently, we've got 87 women working for us full-time. We do have temp staff as well that comes in over higher seasons. And for every additional 1,000 cookies that we can sell, it means we can create another job, which means that there's another 5 to 7 dependents who have a meal on their table tonight. So it may not sound like we're making a real true difference, but the net effect is over 700 full tummies every single day by people buying cookies. So the cookies are merely a vehicle for us to create the jobs that's desperately needed. We also 100% women-owned, 51% Black women-owned. So even though I carry full financial risk for this business, I'm a minority shareholder. I've only got 37% shareholding. We are FDA registered, FSSC accredited, level 2 BE status, VAT registered, and of course your export licensing. You need to be export ready. The reason why I do what I do, as I said, Brooklyn Chest Children's Hospital, this little girl called Nolatando, the nurses gave it to me, and we went there every second weekend to go and assist the nurses to help them to feed the babies and play with toddlers. And the nurses told me that this little one would pass away if we don't give her milk, because normally what would happen, the kids would get sick and they would have to tube the kids. And normally when they tube the kids, it means that the kids die very shortly after. So every second week, we realized that when we went back, kids were not there anymore. And this little baby girl, I sat, first baby ever that I held in my life, I fed her milk, and she ended up surviving, and she is 15 years old now. And every time I want to give up on this business, producing at less than 1% profit margin, due to the fact that it takes us 40 days to bake what a machine takes 1 day, and trying to remain competitive in the industry and in the market, I think back to this little girl and I still follow her journey. And she's a fighter, and I decided, you know what, every single lady that we employ, we know that 5 to 7 children do not go through what these kids have to go through. And that is why I've never given up on this business. And that's why you will hear that I'm a true entrepreneur by heart. And entrepreneurs hustle. We don't stand back for obstacles and red tape. We make sure we actually find out and find solutions, and we keep our heads down and we go forward. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our story shortly. And then last but not least, we've got quite a few awards that got bestowed to us. The one I'm the most proud of is we were Best Employer of the Year in 2012. We were also the best cookie supplier in South Africa and Africa, which for me is a true reflection of how you should conduct business. It doesn't help you to have a good social story if your product quality is not top in the industry, if your pricing is not right and your customer service delivery is not right. To give you a bit of insight, brands that we have, that we supply, which are well-known brands in South Africa, we co-brand with them, which is quite a nice business idea to get yourself into the industry and into retail, especially if you don't have your own merchandisers and distribution system available as yet. And some of the new innovations that we did, and I always tell entrepreneurs, don't just replicate what a successful entrepreneur has already established. Be the first one in the industry to launch your product. And for us, everybody eats cookies. There's already baby teething cookies and toddler cookies available. We added in that something different, which is vegetables. And within the first year, our product category outsold the market leaders who's been the main leaders for the last 28 years. So a little nugget of wisdom, be the first to launch something. Don't replicate what someone else is already doing. Then we've also got our own ranges. I'm going to go past that. And it brings me to our export brand called youcookiecompany.com. So the long and short is, You Cookie Company, we went to our first ever trade show in 2018, and we went with our South African brand name called Khayelitsha Cookies. Firstly, at the show, we realized wrong brand. Even though it's got significance for us in South Africa, firstly, most international people cannot pronounce Khayelitsha. Secondly, it's got no meaning or collaboration with empowering and employing women and making a difference. And we went back to the drawing board after that first trade show, realizing that your name under which you're exporting and the brand and how you position yourself in the brand is critical. That is the first thing you need to get right. If you're not going to get that right, you are going to spend 3/4 of your life trying to explain what your brand is all about. So we went to some of the large universities like your Harvard University, Oxford, Alabama, Tampa, what's the other one that we went to, like Notre Dame and New York University. And we asked them if their students can please assist us with getting to the right brand name. And what we did is there were surveys that we set up. We bounced ideas off these students, and we literally said to them, this is who we are. That's what we stand for. If you had to sell this brand, what would you call it? What stands out? What would make you feel special? And the long and short is that's how we got to the export brand called You. And the reason why we called it You is you are our special ingredient. With your purchase, and in consumer, everybody must understand, is the actual superhero in all of our lives and in our stories, because they've got the capacity and they worked hard for their money, and they are the decision makers on where and what they're going to buy. So if you position your brand at a point where people feel inclusive, where they feel that they're going to benefit out of it, you will find that people will automatically support your brand slightly more. And the name needs to make sense. And that's why we created this brand called You, because you are our special ingredient. When you buy these cookies, you need to feel that you form part of something greater and a greater cause than yourself while enjoying this cookie. And you'll see that the further slogan says, plus us equals we. And the reason why we did it old school, chalkboard, that type writing, is it takes you and us to work together to do women empowerment effectively in South Africa. We cannot do it without you. You cannot do it without us. And hence our slogan and the brand that we developed. And that is the message that we spread across. And tied into this is your social media marketing campaigns, your actual marketing campaigns is, like where you need to actually capitalize on end users. So you need to find people who will actually support your brand and share your message. And that is critical. And unless you actually, find people online residing in the specific areas where you want to market your product from in the USA, even if you do paid adverts, they're not going to reach the right end consumer, even if you put in the demographics and all the rest. To say, for argument's sake, I'm targeting people who reside in New York or Alabama or Tuscaloosa. So you really, really need to have people already linked to your social media accounts like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to have effective marketing. And again, nuggets of wisdom: marketing, 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 marketing. And how do you do marketing without a budget? And that is where networking is so important. You need to network. You need to attend these B2B meetings. And I'm so glad, Rex, that you talked about setting up these B2B meetings, because it's something I've been fighting for how long? Because a B2B meeting ends up assisting you a lot more than sometimes attending a trade show. And then, we developed this brand, and we went back in 2019 to a trade show, and we literally started speaking to people to say, what is the taste profile? How does our cookies differentiate in taste profile, texture, appeal, variance towards those who are actually already on shelf. So another nugget of wisdom, do your research and do it well. And Google is not necessarily going to be able to give you all the details. Unfortunately, it does mean that you have to travel. It means that you need to go there. But if you do an international travel, make the most of it. Don't just go for a trade show. End up going a day or 2 or 3 days before or afterwards, and make sure that you do your marketing research. Go and visit the wholesalers, go and, like walk from store to store, see where it's situated, price points, grammage, weight, buy the products, eat it, compare it. You should never, ever be afraid to actually compare your product to your opposition's product. And if you find that your opposition's product is tastier and better, best you go back to the drawing board and develop a product that will actually speak to the end consumer. And that's where we ended up doing our marketing research with the assistance of EMBA students, as well as attending the trade shows, to realize that the critical gap in the USA market was baking with 30% less sugar. Because there is a very high focus on getting obesity down, as well as portion sizes. So when you look at the industry, it is 50 grams, Elizabeth, it is 50-gram cookies that they currently sell. We've got 40-gram cookies. We bake with 30% less sugar. We incorporated dehydrated vegetables into our product. So you've got a little bit of a naughty with a nice. So immediately it sets us apart from the rest of the industry. These are also other brands and other variants that we listed. So we did an apple and cinnamon, we did a ginger snap, we did a carrot and sweet potato. So the carrot and sweet potato one, unbeknown to us, was the one that people liked the most when we attended the Fancy Food Show last year in New York, and apple and cinnamon. So the taste profile, even though it looks like it's slightly different to what is currently in the market, when people taste it, they are pleasantly surprised. But in our product mix, we made sure that we have a double choc, which the USA, like residents are used to, as well as a ginger snap. It's 2 of the biggest selling industries. And then you bring about your other 4 variants that's got a slight tweak that sets you apart from the rest of the industry. So for us, the first thing that we had to do is we had to understand what is the food safety regulations. Unfortunately, HACCP, especially in your food safety category for manufacturing and food products, a lot of the countries are not going to accept just HACCP. They need ISO 2200. They need FSSC accreditation. And yes, it costs a lot more to maintain and implement those those food safety standards than it would just with HACCP. So your FSSC looks at protection of the food. So it is, how are you going to ensure that that food arrives safely at the end consumer? So it's got a lot more detail on actively making sure that a supplier cannot put something in a box with a raw ingredient. It ensures that your packaging is sealed sufficient enough that nothing can creep in, nothing can go out. So your safety locks, your transport. So when you transport your products, your inner boxes, in your outer boxes, what is your breakage rate? If your breakage rate is more than 10%, you need to go back to the drawing board. Then your packaging is not going to work, because consumers do not want to end up buying broken products. And it took us a better part of 4 years to get all of our ducks in a row after that first trade show in 2018, when we came back and we realized, firstly, it doesn't help us to export if we're not FSSC accredited. So that went on to our planning board, and we actively ensured that we got our FSSC accreditation. The second step was, what are the ingredients that's prohibited? And that's why I specifically still kept the peppermint chocolate version in that we had. So peppermint, known to us when we launched it, your chocolate mint cookie is a top seller in South Africa for us, but there was regulation, that stricter regulation about the import of peppermint. And that is why we decided, instead of going through that whole rigmarole and rebranding and relabeling, we're not going to do that. We're rather going to replace it with an additional flavor. Step 3. Do your research properly. There is a huge difference between a food importer, a food agent, a food broker, and a food distributor. So you need to go through the training courses, and there is brilliant training courses there, understanding your codes, understanding your export codes, understanding, like your classifications on when you export, like under what code do you do it? Are you getting paid up front? Or are you getting paid after the shipments arrived? And the reality is some of the USA buyers got burned by African companies, who didn't end up meeting their part of the requirement. So you will find that, especially if you go new into a country and your brand's not established yet, majority of your risk is actually on you. So you need to grow capital that you can send that first pallet to the USA, and you basically carry majority of the costs around it, unless you're very lucky, and like the guys of Pura at the previous fancy food trade show, where they ended up getting contracts where they get paid half up front and half once the shipment arrives in the USA. So you need to understand your trading terms. You need to understand who is it that you want to work for? Who is it that you want to work with? Do you purely need a distributor on that side? So you ship the product, you sell it on your own portals online. And there again, we had to learn expensive lessons, because that's the route we decided to go. And then you realize after everything and the shipment arrived there, oh boy, you cannot pay in US dollars to a South African company. You need to have the distributor on that side. The money must actually go into his bank account and he pays you again. So again, critical to make real good relationships on that side. Otherwise, and it's based on trust, absolute trust. So you need to be able to trust your distributor on that side. You need to be able to trust your food agents. And you'll find that at these trade shows, a lot of food agents will actually come through to you, but they've got retainers that they ask every single month. Choose the right one that's going to work for your brand. Don't just pay a food agent and food consultant if they cannot guarantee you some sort of return, or they're prepared to work on a higher commission and a lower retainer rate. Remember, your product is one of thousands that they're going to sell at the end of the day. So again, they're partnerships. And then also critical benchmarking. What is your landed product price on that side? Taking into consideration your food agent's going to charge you a percentage, your food distributor is going to charge you a percentage, the retailer is going to charge you a percentage. And remember, that's accumulated percentages. So you can't take, for argument's sake, a 10 Rand box is going to retail for 40 Rand. If you equate it back into US dollars to 2.4 US dollars, it's not going to work that way, because everybody adds their taxes at different points. So understand your rates, understand your trading terms. It's critical. And if you don't, go to USA Trade Up, speak to guys, find out who is a mentor in the industry that you can actually speak to. Otherwise, that can actually lead to your business closing. So you need to really do your homework and do it very well. We did our FDA accreditation through Registrar Corp. I can highly recommend them, and I'm glad that they're on with one of the speakers this afternoon. Really an amazing organization to work through. So please use them. And then networking. Attend trade shows. Set up the B2B meetings. And Rex, I'm going to be contacting you because I need B2B meetings. And you know what? The end buyer in America specifically, their details are so well hidden that I think, like they're more guarded than the president of the USA at the end of the day. It is so difficult to get to the end buyer and his contact details. So please make sure that when you have that opportunity, you are well prepared. You give your business a 3-minute pitch that they hooked within that 3 minutes. Don't go into a B2B meeting and you wobble and you waff on, and afterwards people sit there and they go, what are you actually selling? You need to be precise. You need to have your ducks in a row. What's your price? What's your landed price? What's your exco price? X works price. What is your weight? How does it compare to the rest of the consumers in the industry? So you need to really gear yourself to know what you are talking about. And then it also says, I also specifically said it in there, we got badly burned by Googling to find business partners, and we got taken for a run. Don't do it. Meet in person, set up the B2B meetings. And then success comes with perseverance. It doesn't happen overnight. And we had a presentation from Sally Williams when we were there, and it took them 5 years to actually get to break-even point. So for every product that they sold, they literally had to give 2 to 3 away initially. So it is not this quick, okay, I'm getting the orders and suddenly my business is going to boom. You need to realize that it's a journey that's going to take you a couple of months or a couple of years. You're going to have to invest, but eventually it will reap. You will reap the harvest of your investment that you've sown. Time-wise, financially, samples, it will come through. And then understand the end consumer. It doesn't help you to have this brilliant product that sells in your own home country, but there is no market for it in the USA or Europe or wherever you want to export market. Make sure that there is actually a market for it. And when you look at the statistics, a lot of, especially on food brands, a lot of the food brands are held by 3 or 4 main players in the food industry within the USA. So specifically under the cookie category, 63% of the market share is held by 2 cookie suppliers. So don't be audacious and say, I want to supply 10% of the USA market within the first year. Rather set goals that you can achieve to say, I want to supply 0.1% of the end consumers that is currently purchasing this specific brand. That's realistic. It's achievable. It's measurable. You need to measure your success. And then also under promise, over deliver. Please do not say you're going to send a proposal tonight and then you got busy and distracted during the course of the day and tonight comes and that proposal is not there. It's not a good reflection. Every interaction counts. Make sure that everything, every email is on time, before time. It is professionally done. It looks the part. It speaks the part. When you eventually speak to that person, look the part. No one wants to sit on a Zoom call and see you in your pajamas or your gown or your hair is messy. Make sure you dress the part. And then also, you need to remember that you need to build in a little bit of buffer, specifically staying in South Africa with your Rand, Euro, and Rand dollar exchange rates. It takes one notice from Eskom and we see that Rand just taking a nosedive again. And last but not least, I want to leave you with little nuggets of wisdom from my side. The ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. As entrepreneurs, you need to be your biggest supporter. You need to believe in yourself, in your brand, in your customers, in your market, in your abilities. No one else is going to pat you on the back. You need to drive force. You need to equip yourself with knowledge to actually be enabled to, reach that next destination, to reach that next goal. And also take time to reflect back on where you were and where you are now, because that's where you'll see the growth steps. And last but not least, and that's why this brand called You is so close to my heart, it is not the founder or the inventor of a product that's the true hero. It is the first person affirming them. So you need to realize as well, when you start wanting to sell your product, don't treat a consumer like just another person. They are the ones who pay your salary at the end of the day. Make sure you treat them with the right respect that is due. And when you've got time, go and watch the little YouTube clip of the 2 wolves in the Yellow National River Park who changed the whole economy and the whole ecosystem of that park. And realize you are a wolf. As an SMME, you are a wolf. You've got it. You can do it. Equip yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Audrey. That was great. I'm here. Great. So we've got a question here for you. I've also got some myself, but thanks, Corbin. We'll start with Corbin Thompson. He's from Etrusa. So Corbin asked, can you provide an indication, because it keeps them jumping away from me, everyone's sending messages now. Can you provide an indication of what getting your overall certification cost?
So on an annual basis, your audit costs you around 60,000 Rand annually. However, we had to contract in external food safety accountants to assist us with your nutritional value, the upkeep on the international market of regulations that change continuously. So instead of our monthly overhead costs used to be about 5,500, it went up to about 20,000. So you're looking at annually your food safety certification from HACCP to FSSC, you're looking at about a 200,000 Rand additional investment annually. Over and above that, you've got additional 1 or 2 staff members that you employ to fill in, like all the paperwork that is required with that. But in hindsight, I will do it and I will recommend it highly. It sounds like a huge investment, but it is worth every cent.
Awesome. So that's about $10,000 for people that aren't working in rands here. And hopefully it stays at that or goes the other way. Audrey, we've got another question here. Do you think it's best to sell products ex-factory and FOB so that you don't have to get involved in the logistics side of things and understanding all that?
That is always the best route to go. So if you're lucky enough to clinch that deal, hang on to that customer for dear life. I wish that I could still, or I could get a deal like that. Most of ours was where we had to actually take responsibility for up until the product is cleared through customs in the USA. So yes, if you can do Ex Works, FOB, go that route. Highly recommended.
Awesome, great. And then I've got, I think I've covered all. There's some other things from other people there that have come through. But how long did it take you to get FDA registered? Just out of
2 years. So from your HACCP certification, it takes you about 18 months to redo all of your food safety paperwork, and you need to have a proven track record of at least 8 months before they can come and do an audit to then certify you. So you're looking at a 2-year process. I know of some people that's taken up to 5 years.
Wow. Okay, sure. So it's yeah, you gotta be ready for it. What in that process, I understand that you have to have an agent in the US in order to get FDA certified. How did you find your agent, and how did you manage to get something like that happening?
Again, your B2B meetings that you have. So when your local country actually brings delegates over, like the factory tour that you did, make sure you connect. So it's networking. And that's why I specifically said not specifically on Google. Don't go to Google, because you've got scamsters on Google as well. And make sure that you have networking sessions, that you meet people via Zoom, on these type of platforms that we have today with your local government assistance. USA Trade Hub, Cos and his team is phenomenal to actually assist. That's where you start building up your networks to work with the right people.
Okay. And that agent, you had to sign some kind of an agreement with them, and how long did that take, and what was the requirements for you to know that agent is correct? What did you have to check?
So for us, it was an ex-South African that actually relocated into the USA. So he supplies wines, beers, and all of that at this moment in time, build up a reputable database. So even though we're not wine, not part of his clientele, we nearly needed a distributor. So a place we can ship our products to, people order online, they pay it into his account, he goes and he ships. So the agreement we signed was a very basic one of, we deliver the stock to your warehouse, you make sure you ship it out from there, and then month end, whatever sales it is, we negotiated, this is your portion, this is our portion that needs to get paid through to us. So again, we had to mitigate the risk, and he is left with no risk. And that's why I'm saying, if you can get Ex Works, or if you can get a wholesale agreement where it's literally people buy from you, they take all the responsibility, that is the best deal that you can ever get. You hang on to those for dear life.
Great. Teresa has a question, and I mean, I can rephrase it for you, but she was asking if the USA Trade Hub give assistance for registration and
So basically, we did ask the Registrar Corp, but even though you are FDA, then you need to also submit your labeling regulations. So your labeling regulations and your review of a label becomes very expensive, specifically through the FDA. So that is where USA Trade Hub assisted us by giving us an 80-20% grant on paying for the labeling reviews. Now, to give you an idea, one label review comes back with 80 pages of documents that you need to understand, and you had to swallow in a dictionary and be a food scientist to understand what they're telling you. So again, your food safety consultants to apply the document that you get back is critically important. And also with trade shows like the Fancy Food Trade Show, it is so important for the USA Chamber to actually assist us in USA Trade Hub to jump through all that last hoops to get your product through and clear it successfully through customs.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks very much, Audrey. That was much appreciated, very passionate and exciting. I am going to actually be out at Fancy Food as mentioned, and I'm going to be showcasing some of Audrey's products while I'm there. So that'll be very exciting, and hopefully we can find some more business for you. So thanks for your time, Audrey. And we'll move on to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is Coley Anderson, and she's from Registrar Corp. I know there was a question on going back to one of Audrey's slides, but we've actually got Coley here to give us really deep insight into FDA. So yeah, Registrar Corp, I've known about them for many years. Helped us with some other programs and stuff as well in the past, and yeah, really are the key people to go to in the market for getting FDA registered. Very trusted, work very closely with USAID as well on programs, and well respected by them. So a great knowledge in the industry as well. So just to give you a little bit of background on Coley. Coley, are you there? Can you turn your camera on?
I am here. Yes. Hold on. I as you were answering questions earlier, I said to do everything to keep my mouth shut because I'm like, I know the answer to that. So I'm excited to talk and talk about that. But you go ahead, Rex.
Cool. Thanks, Coley. So just a little bit on Coley. She's the Director of Industry and Government Relations and Enterprise Solutions Specialist for Registrar Corp. Ms. Anderson focuses on educating foreign governments, trade associations, and individual companies about U.S. Food and Drug Administration regulations. In addition to English, she speaks fluent Spanish and has conducted dozens of seminars on US FDA food regulations in Latin America, Australia, Asia, and the United States. So yeah, Coley is based at Registrar Corp in Hampton, at their headquarters in Hampton, Virginia. So she's coming live from Virginia today. And I'm going to then stop sharing my screen and hand over to her. She runs you through the requirements and registration process for FDA. Thank you, Coley.
Yes, thank you, Rex. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's morning on my side of the world. And I'm excited to be here because, it is my passion. The number one thing about Registrar Corp is we want to get your products from Africa onto the shelf in the United States. I mean, it is something where the US consumer is enamored with products from around the world. And so it's all about really understanding those regulations when, if we can just break it down and explain it, it really is achievable and you shouldn't be overwhelmed by it. I mean, the number one thing when I'm traveling around the world and I ask people, why are you not exporting? What holds you up? And the number one answer is FDA or US FDA regulations. So we want to jump in and look at these regulations. Let's break them down and not be fearful of them, but just understand them. So as an overview, we're going to talk about the FDA registration. I heard a little talk about that earlier. Prior notice, food canning establishment registrations, labeling requirements, Part C, food safety requirements, and then we'll take some questions and answers afterwards. So first of all, I want to say AGOA. I am, again, very passionate about that. I think it's a wonderful regulation that we've come up with to have duty-free access to the United States with your products. It gives you an opportunity to enter the market and be competitive. And so I want to commend, it's just a great program. So we want to participate in anything that deals with AGOA, and also products outside of that, of course. And these are the eligible countries for AGOA. And like I said, in the past, pre-COVID, I had traveled all over Southern Africa and have spoken to companies, seen the product in their hands, gone to the manufacturing plants, and I come back to the United States and say, oh my gosh, there's so many great things, but it's about getting that product here. And one part of that is the logistics, but the other part is the basic FDA requirements. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the food facility registration. It's probably one of the simplest things to do, but it's become a little tricky. FDA says, you must register your company. And a lot of people who have brands, they'll say, oh, I don't manufacture process. They have a third-party manufacturer and they'll register their office because they are the company brand, but they're not really doing any of the touching the food at all or doing any of the manufacturing or processing. Let me advise, do not register unless you manufacture, you process, you pack, or you store food for animal or human consumption in the United States. You do not need to register if you're just the brand name. I know that's hard to imagine, but imagine this, the registration follows the food. There's so many people, I have this a lot in UK, I have this a lot really everywhere, where they say, well, I'm the company and my office is here in the city and I want to register my company. Again, this is for FDA to follow the food. So it's very frustrating when you register your office and there's no food there, and an FDA decides to do a surprise inspection and shows up in UK or Africa and there's no food. And you say, oh, well, we're the brand, we're not the company manufacturer. So please know, do not register unless your facility that you're putting that address in the registration manufactures, processes, packs, or stores food for animal or human consumption in the United States. So that is very important. The second thing I want to highlight is the U.S. agent. I heard a comment about U.S. agent. Now, that's a word that is a little tricky because there's several different types of agents. There's customs agents, there's brokers, there's agents, so business agents. When I say the U.S. agent, I'm being very specific to the persons whose name you're putting inside of your FDA registration. So we're not talking about your business partner. We're not talking about your customs broker. We're not talking about anything dealing with customs. We're talking about FDA. And your U.S. agent for your registration must go inside of your registration. So you're saying to FDA, when you put that name in there, hey, FDA, you're not going to call Africa if you have a question, but you're going to call my U.S. agent. And my U.S. agent is going to be knowledgeable about my product and know that I'm FDA compliant. So understand that when you register your facility, you have to also put in a U.S. agent. And that U.S. agent does not have to be your business partner, does not have to be your custom broker, does not have to be your importer. Now, it could be any of those people. It has to be a warm body in the United States that FDA can pick up the phone and call and ask questions about your product. Now, be careful in the fact that when you choose your U.S. agent, you want to choose somebody that's knowledgeable. It's almost like choosing somebody to represent you with your taxes to the IRS in the United States. You want someone that's not going to open their mouth and get you in trouble. So when you choose your agent, and Registrar Corp does this, we act as U.S. agent to over 30,000 companies around the world because these companies trust us that when we open our mouth, when FDA calls and says, hey, we have a question about this product in South Africa or in Botswana or Malawi or wherever, we can answer confidently, yes, they are registered. What would you like to know? Another thing about the registration is that you have to renew this registration every 2 years. Super important. Also know that when you register your facility, you're opening yourself up to inspection. So if you're not ready for the FDA to come visit you, don't register yet, and don't ship your product yet. I mean, you have to register if you're shipping and doing business with the United States, but understand the moment you register your facility, you've opened the door to say to FDA, come anytime. Which takes me back to the original statement, do not register your office because they will arrive and be very peeved that they've come all this way and there's no food at your office. So please register the facility that is manufacturing, processing, and packaging. Now, another thing that came up before, it used to be that you'd register your facility, you were done, one and done. Then FDA changed it and said, well, there's no allowance for updates. So then they said every 2.5 years. So they've done that. And then the next thing that they changed it to, it says every facility should have a unique facility identifier. Now, what is that? What is a unique facility identifier? You cannot have a valid registration now. This is new, guys. This is within the last year. You cannot have a valid registration with the FDA without putting your U.S. agent in there. And then you also have to put your UFI number in there. Now, where do you get your UFI number? As it states here, Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet is the only acceptable number currently that FDA will accept as a unique facility identifier that you have to put in this registration. So when you go to register and you sit down to your computer and you say, I'm ready to register with FDA, you can go directly with the FDA or you can go through someone like us, Registrar Corp, and we'll help you through the process. But if you go directly with the FDA, you're going to have that unique facility identifier. You're going to have your U.S. agent, and you have to be ready to put all that into the registration. And if you don't have it, you can't complete it. So please note that often it's very helpful when you have someone like ourselves, Registrar Corp, to assist. Now, again, I cannot stress every 2 years on the even number year, you must renew this registration. And you would be so surprised. Companies get busy. The person that in the company that's babysitting that registration leaves or goes to another company and someone forgets to renew the registration. So you have to renew that registration December, before the even numbered year, because by January or February, FDA will cancel your registration. Your food will be out on the water coming to the United States and it will be canceled. So please remember, every 2 years on the even numbered year, you must renew your registration. That takes place easily December, the month before the new year. So you want to get that done. Now, there's some exemptions for registration. If you're a trading company, you're not touching the food. And, the exemptions are clear and they make sense when you understand, again, the purpose of the registration. The purpose of the registration is to follow the food. So if you're a trading company bartering and doing trading and you're just making deals, you're never touching the food, so they don't need to register. Personal residents don't register. Transportation only. Farms. They do register only if they're processing on the farm. If you're just a farm grower, you don't register. If you grow and then package and process that food, you register because now you become a processing facility. But if you're just a grower, you do not register with FDA. Retail food establishments. By the time that food reaches the retail food establishments, all sealed up, there's no possibility for contamination, adulteration, so they don't register. They're just putting the food on the shelf. Fishing vessels don't. USDA regulated facilities do not. Now, another requirement, prior notice. So many times shipments were arriving to the US port and nobody knew what was in them. So now FDA has come up, and this has been many years now, this is not new, but just needs to be highlighted because it can be skipped sometimes to some of our new exporters. Prior notice gives notification to FDA. My product's coming. What is my product? And so therefore it allows them to take that information and determine whether or not there may be a need for further inspection. Now, what they base that further inspection need on is, okay, is this a new exporter? Is this a high-risk food? Does this importer or exporter have a reputation for shipping products that have problems in the United States? So does the country have an issue with this particular product? And so FDA takes all of that into account. And when you fill out that prior notice, and usually your custom broker will do it or your importer will do it, you can do it as well. But the bottom line is, once it's done, it allows FDA to analyze that data and decide whether or not your shipment's going to be further inspected. Now, depending on how your shipment arrives to the United States depends on the amount of notice you need to give FDA that your product's coming. So as you can see here by road, coming from Mexico into the United States, you only need to give them 2 hours, 4 hours by rail, 4 hours by air, 8 hours by water. And before the food is shipped internationally, which applies to you, you need to get that prior notice done. And again, it allows FDA to analyze all of this. Now, we've talked about the normal registration. If you manufacture, process, package, or store food for animal or human consumption in the United States, you must register your facility. But there's another registration. It's called the Food Canning Establishment Registration and Submission Identifier. And it sounds like a lot of words, but really what it boils down to are products that look like this. If your products are in a jar, a can, or a Tetra Pak. Now, this is not the only qualifier, but this is a big red flag that quite possibly your product needs an additional registration. And FDA says you have to do this because these products are high risk, botulism. If not cooked properly, sealed properly, these products can be deadly. And so therefore, they think it requires just a little bit more attention than just the average registration. Because imagine, most people tell me, oh, I'm FDA approved, here's my registration. Registration is not an approval. Registration is just a notification to FDA that we're doing business and we're manufacturing a product that will be sold in the United States. So because registration is not an approval, they need to analyze products like this, very high risk products like this further. So that's the Food Canning Establishment Registration, known as FCE. And I always tell people, know the buzzwords, because when you're talking to importers, they're going to, say these words to you and you need to understand them. So if you have a product that is, and here we're looking at the pH level and the water activity, that's the final indicator whether or not your product is. The big red flag is can, Tetra Pak, jar, but then we go further and look at the pH balance and the water activity. And if you meet those levels, then you require a Food Canning Establishment registration. And this is super important because a lot of people will start shipping their food over to the United States and they have the registration, but they don't have the Food Canning Establishment registration. And then boom, when it gets to the port, the FDA is looking for that FCE, that's what we call it, and there's no FCE number. Additionally, there's something called the submission identifier, and that is another tricky thing. So you can have 3 cans of different sizes. So first you have the facility is registered under the Food Canning Establishment registration. Then you have the submission identifier, and that is with each size of can, you've submitted information to FDA that says we cooked this can at this temperature, we sealed it at this point, this is what we did. Because each can, based on its size, requires different cooking temperatures to make sure that it is safe to eat once sealed and then reopened. So this is the tricky part. People will register their facility, but they don't do their submission identifiers. And the submission identifiers are one by one, a submission to FDA, explaining your cooking process or your processing of this product. And if the size changes, you have a different submission identifier. So therefore, the regulation comes known as FCE SID, Food Canning Establishment Submission Identifier. So when you hear that your importer asks you, excuse me, do you have your FCE SID? You need to say yes or no based on, as you see on the screen, the final pH levels and the water activity. It's not just the can, the Tetra Pak, and the jar. Those are just big red flags. Someone once told me you can tell when something's FCE is when you take it off the shelf and open it, and then when you're done with it, you have to put it in the refrigerator. 9 times out of 10, that's an FCE SID product. Again, but it really does boil down to the pH balance and the water activity. So we have a link here that you can take down that is free of charge, and it will identify whether your products are subject to FCE SID. Again, super important to know those acronyms because you will be asked for them by your importer, and you should have them if it applies to your product. So if you're not sure, you can go to our FCE wizard and check it. The SID wizard down here below is just to verify if your submission identifier that you've requested from FDA for each of your product sizes have been approved, and the number is good because your importer will be checking that as well. Now, another big reason why products are delayed at the port in the United States, labeling. And I tell people this is probably, it seems complex, but it's the easiest thing to check. And so before you ship to the United States, have your labels checked. It's the easiest thing to catch at the port. It's visual. FDA can take a quick glance and be like, no. So I say before you ship, please check your labels. Have someone check your labels. It's worth the money of, whether it's $1,500, $800, $600, do it because it will be a lot better than having your product detained at the port and have to be reconditioned. I've had importers that have had products at the port that the labels were not correct and they were so wrong that FDA said, nope, it's not moving from this port. You have to re-sticker. We call it recondition the product. And so imagine you had to get people out there to stick stickers on stuff that's on a container. So better to do it before it leaves your country. Get it done. It's worth the investment in time and money to have someone check it with a discerning eye. Now, mandatory declaration, statement of identity. What is your product? Is it a cookie? Is it a cereal? So you'd be surprised. Something like that is left off. Your ingredients list and nutritional facts panel. All of those are things that are absolutely important. Now, in the United States, we went from old label to new label. FDA recognized, based on some of the health concerns in the United States, that we needed to change our label a little bit, change it around, and make sure that it was identifying and highlighting certain things. So as you see in the old label, the calories are super small. So when you go to the store to buy something, you're like, oh, I love these cookies. And you can't, if you don't have your bifocals on or whatever, you can't read the calories and you're buying like an 800 calorie cookie or a donut. So FDA wanted to really point out, hey, beware, this cookie is 230 calories or 800 calories, and there's in some cases 1,000. And so they made that big and bold so nobody had to struggle to get that information. And then if you further go down on the label, you'll see that on the left, it was total carbohydrates, 37 grams, that was it. Well, now on the right, it has total sugars under that dietary fiber. And the total sugars then break down into included sugars. Now, this is big, because I can't tell you how many trade shows I've been to where people have these wonderful, healthy juice drinks, and they're like, oh, yes, it's fresh juice. It's really great. It's, we're selling it here in the United States. And I see like 42 grams of sugar. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, 42 grams of sugar. Did you add any sugar to that? Or is that natural sugar? And they say, oh, no, it's all natural. Well, now you can't lie. Here you see that it says total sugars, but then it says included how many added sugars. So if they put any sweeteners in there, I want to know about it. FDA wants you to know about it. Is it a natural sweetener, a natural fruit from the fruit, or did they add some sugar in that product? And you want to know that. So FDA, again, highlights that there. And then it goes down and they took off some items here where vitamin C. I guess we're all good with vitamin C in the United States, but we're a little deficient in potassium, vitamin D. So they wanted to highlight those things. They removed things and made the vitamin C voluntary. And so here you see, the point out where all of these changes have been made. And again, this seems like really simple. You think you could take a picture of this, slap it on your label and be good to go. But font sizes, bar font sizes, the really meticulous things that are on this label can be missed. And if they're missed, your product is stopped at the port. So my best advisement to you is please have your label checked before shipping. Registrar Corp does that. You can have anybody do that. Please get that done. Now, another thing that changed on the labels was the reference customary consumed numbers, because the rack values. So the rack values are what FDA says a serving is. A serving of ice cream is a third of a cup. A serving of chips, a serving of whatever the product is. They changed all those rack values to say, you guys cannot say that a serving size of ice cream is 1/3 cup, because it's more than that. And we know that. And when you actually do the actual serving of what's customarily consumed in the United States in one serving, all of those calories go up, all of those sugars go up, and now your product looks pretty bad. Well, we need to show the Americans or the consumer what he is going to be eating if he eats the reference customarily consumed amount. So rack values have changed in the United States. Now, FDA recognizes the fact that there's different types of bottle sizes and container sizes. So the labels have to change, and you can't fit everything on the label. So here you see the different types of labels that are accepted in the United States based on your packaging size. Here it's just, the organic, labeling for food organic. We always throw this slide in, and it's a USDA regulated label when you're talking about organic, but we put this here because it's important for you to know, based on the percentage of your ingredients being organic, what you can actually call your product. You can't say something's 100% organic if it's not 100%. And if it's only 70 to 95% organic ingredients, you can only use the phrase made with organic. So this is important to acknowledge that you have to be careful when you're trying to claim organic based on the percentage in your product. Okay, Food Safety Modernization Act, biggest change in 70 years with the FDA. Now, nobody really says Food Safety Modernization Act. Everybody in the United States says FSMA. Okay, this is another buzzword that if you're exporting to the United States, you should know this word. I always tell people, if I'm an importer and you don't even know what FSMA is, then I'm concerned about your compliance level. You should know Food Safety Modernization Act. The acronym is FSMA. It was signed into law on January 4th, 2011, and it was an attempt to go from being reactive to food issues and challenges and illnesses to being preventive. The United States government said, FSMA, we're going to create some regulations. FSMA is the umbrella of the bag. And then inside that bag, we're going to have a bunch of regulations that are going to make us more preventive than reactive. And one of those regulations is the new food safety requirement, which is the United States HARP-C food safety plan. Now, people get this totally mixed up many times. They say, oh, I have HACCP. I said, I didn't say HACCP. We said HARP-C. HACCP is different than HARP-C. HACCP was a requirement in a food plan that was originally created for NASA engineers, because when that product went up into space, they had to make sure that it wasn't going to go bad and that it was packaged properly. So they had to really pay attention to the processing of the product and make sure that it was able to endure the time that it was in, out in space. So HACCP was created originally for NASA, and then it went on to seafood and juice. So in the United States, the only companies that have to have HACCP, really have to have HACCP, is seafood and juice companies. So FDA realized, we have a great food safety plan for our high-risk products like seafood and juice HACCP, seafood HACCP, but we don't have anything for the cookie maker, the cereal maker. How do we know that their products are equally compliant with FDA? We have no food safety plan for them. If you are a cookie maker or if you are a cereal maker, there was no food safety plan for you or required in the United States. I mean, you could do it of your own volition, have your HACCP plan, but you weren't required to have it in the United States by law. Now, I can't speak to what your buyers are expecting of you, but by law, you didn't have to have HACCP if you were a cookie or a cereal person. So FDA created the HARP-C plan, and the HARP-C plan is a little different than HACCP. One is hazard analysis and critical control points. And then as you see here, we have the hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. So this is different. And so I always tell people, get ready when you're shipping to the United States or planning to do business in the United States. You have a HACCP plan. 9 times out of 10, most foreign companies have a HACCP plan, but they don't have a HARP-C plan. And again, that if you look at the words here, hazard analysis and critical control points is HACCP, hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls. Again, this regulation and this food safety plan is looking at being preventive and looking at all the points in your processing to focus on prevention and not being reactionary. So in these requirements, you have to have this food safety plan, but you also must have a qualified individual. So at any point in time, FDA comes to inspect your facility, you should be able to identify a qualified individual that knows everything about the processing of your product and has been a major contributor, if not the sole contributor, of your food safety plan. FDA expects to ring your doorbell, knock on your door, whatever it is at your warehouse or your facility and say, please show me your qualified individual. I would like to talk to them. So be ready for that. Don't say, what is a qualified individual? Because right off the bat, that says you are non-compliant. Now, there's some exemptions to this preventive controls food safety plan. Obviously, juice and seafood are exempt. They have the HACCP in the United States. It's quite rigorous, and FDA did not feel a need to duplicate or put more burden on them for reporting and plans. Alcoholic beverages, low risk, they're under TTB, so it's not necessary. Dietary supplements go under current good manufacturing practices. USDA products follow USDA regulations. Farms, if you're only a grower, you do not have to have a food safety plan. But don't worry, FDA came up with something for the farms. It's called the produce safety plan. Okay, so these are areas where you're either exempt or you have modified requirements. Okay, how does FDA enforce this? How do they know you have your food safety plan? They're not collecting it at the port. The Hep C plan is not collected at the port. So they know, and we're going to talk about the importers' requirements, but the importers have a requirement called FSVP. And FSVP requires that they check things from you. So FDA can stop off in the importer's office, your importer's office, and check to see if he's collected your Hep C food safety plan. They can also make the journey over to Africa to a foreign facility inspection. They can inspect at the port and then begin asking questions and then say, hey, we want more information. Send us your food safety plan. They can do an FDA warning letter on you. What are the consequences? Import alerts. If you have a shipment that's constantly having issues, or a product, or as a company, you have issues, then FDA will put you on what's called an import alert. And this is where all the ports of the United States can communicate. It goes on a big bulletin board and it says, if this guy ships, please detain his product and do further inspection. Detention without physical examination. So this can happen. So you don't want to go on import alert. Now, it's important to understand your foreign supplier, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program called FSVP. This is the responsibility of your U.S. importer. And the only reason why you care about this is because you need to understand his expectation. What he's going to ask of you is important. It's all part of your readiness for the U.S. market. If you don't know what your buyer's going to want, then you won't be ready. Regulations are important on your side of the fence, but what does the U.S. importer need? The U.S. importer has to comply with the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, FSVP, another acronym that you should be very familiar with. FSVP is now a regulation that FDA said to the U.S. importer, hey, U.S. importer, it's because of you this food is entering the country, so do some due diligence. FDA cannot be at every facility. FDA cannot check everything coming in the port. Things would be very slow to get into the United States. So they put the burden on the U.S. importer. So now the importer must monitor their foreign suppliers. They must have a qualified individual that will review your food safety plan. Importers will expect your importer to ask you for the following: HACCP plans, process flow charts, product descriptions, labeling, label, and third-party audits. These are the type of things that they're going to ask from you. And they're going to ask from you for your Hep C food safety plan. So be ready to give this information. So many times companies don't have their Hep C food safety plan that the importer breaks it down into the components that they actually need that would normally be found in the food safety plan. So they go, okay, if I get his HACCP plan, his process flow chart, his product description, his label, and third-party audits, I can still do my homework, which is write the FSVP plan. FDA is saying you are responsible for confirming that the facility is compliant and that the product is compliant. Now, what is the importer monitoring you for? Guess what? FDA says to the importer, if you're bringing this food into the United States, check the third-party audits. But by law, they have to monitor if your FDA inspections are going well with FDA, if you have any warning letters on file, if you have any import alerts, import refusals, or recalls on your product. That's what the importer is monitoring by law. He has to check you for before he brings you into the country. So that's why I tell everybody, get it right the first time. Let's do the homework right the first time, get all A's, and have a great sheet. So when your importer has to monitor you and document that he's monitoring, then he is able to do that with little, fret, because you are all good. Now, how can we help you with all of these things? We talked about registration. We talked about U.S. agent. We talked about prior notice. We talked about labeling. Low acid canned food, that was the FCESID. We talked about the food safety and the FSMA compliance services needs, where you have your FSMA things like your Hep C plans, which is a food safety plan. We can help with all of that. I want to also point out, we talked about FSVP, and I want to go back to that for a quick second and say that that is the responsibility of the U.S. importer. But there are times when the foreign exporter is shipping to the United States and there is no U.S. importer, right? And that happens when you are shipping to a trade show. You don't have an importer. So in that case, and understand the regulation, the purpose of this regulation is to have your food checked and confirmed that your facility and your food are compliant before it reaches the United States. So if you don't have a U.S. importer to check you, who is checking you? FDA will not allow the foreign exporter to do this foreign supplier verification program on himself. So what happens is you have to hire, and this is another agent that gets confusing, an FSVP agent. So we talked about the US agent in your registration, and then we now have another agent, which is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program agent. And that is the person that's going to review your food safety documents, make the assessment that you are compliant, write a report, sign it, and keep it on file in office. We do that as a company, a Foreign Supplier Verification Program agent. This is what's needed when you're shipping to trade shows. You have no US importer. Who's checking your information? So remember, it's also important for you to understand the Foreign Supplier Verification Program so that you can understand your importer's expectations, but you'll also need to understand it because you may have to hire somebody in the case you don't have a US importer. So again, we move on to our last slide, which is, again, we have solutions to help you. We believe at Registrar Corp not only doing a lot of your work for you if you pay us to do it, but we also believe in educating you. So while we do our work, we have online training where we say, hey, go take our online training so that you can one day take over this work and do it yourself. I know that sounds strange because we would lose business, but we really believe in empowering companies to manage their compliance. And we don't mind complimenting and assisting you with that. So now we're at the question and answers period, and I am done.
Awesome. Thanks, Audrey. Great. So just having a look. There we go. Cool. Okay. So Audrey,
Coley.
oh, sorry. Jeez, that's bad.
Although I love Audrey, I loved your story, by the way. I think your journey and your export and your company is beautiful, and it's always good to have a story to tell like that in the United States. So I don't mind being identified with Audrey, but I am Coley.
No, that's my bad. Golly, yeah, we've got a few questions here. I'll start with them. Okay, so firstly, how do you know if your product is high risk?
Great question. So high risk products tend to be products that, like seafood is high risk. And if you're specifically addressing the FCE SID thing I talked about, it's not about being high risk there. That's about being your pH levels and your water activity. And FDA considers that a high risk product because it's in a can, a jar, Tetra Pak. Many years ago, people died from botulism because truly it is a problem if you don't cook it well enough, and I don't know the detail, I'm not a scientist, but in the processing of that product, if it's not done properly when it's sealed, when it opened, people will die. So if you have products like that, seafood, you know how that goes bad. We all know. I think you can kind of generally guess some of the high risk products, but in that FCE SID scenario, it's really about the water activity and the pH balance in the container that it comes in.
Great. Why is ISO 22001 not for food, or for food not a requirement?
So I don't know audits. I can tell you that most foods in the United States, when it comes on the buyer side, not on the compliance side for FDA, but they accept GFSI audits. So FSSC 22000, SQF, BRC, these are the normal schemes. Now, if there's a 22001 and it's not food oriented, then I'm not going to know about it. But I can tell you the ones that are accepted are FSS 22000, SQF, and BRC. I always get all those mixed up, but yes.
A lot of acronyms.
Yeah, it is really, just stumble over them all.
Awesome. And Teresa's got a question here. FDA and cosmetic manufacturers, let's sort of focus around them. I think this is Teresa Moller, who heads up the South African Cosmetics Export Council. Is FDA required for cosmetics manufacturers on products like lip ice or lipsticks and things like that?
Great question. We have a whole team that handles that, but I can answer that question. Prior to this year, Teresa, there was no registrations for cosmetics for voluntary. But under the new MOCRA, so we have FSMA for food, 70-year change, and we have MOCRA for cosmetics. And that's a new umbrella regulation or requirement that says, guess what, cosmetics, starting in 2023, and I think it starts I don't know the actual month that it starts. We have a whole team that's focused on that new regulation, but it does start this year. That it goes from voluntary registration for cosmetics to now mandatory. And I'm so happy about that because, obviously I use I use lotions and everything. And I couldn't believe that facilities did not have to register with FDA prior to this year. But this year, yesterday said they will be registering. They're working on the portal and I'm getting weekly updates from our team. So I'm not totally versed in that, but just be ready for that because that's coming. I mean, within the months, you will have to register.
And that's MOCRA, M-O-C-R-A.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's the Modernization of Cosmetic Act.
Yeah.
So
Cosmetic Regulations Act. Yes. Okay, great.
lots of acronyms, Rex. I'm trying to keep them all up here.
In your experience, what are certain documents that seem to have tripped people up when they come over to you and wanting to get FDA? What's making people spend 2 years and other people take 5 years?
So it doesn't have to be that long. And I think what happens is if you don't have the efficiency of the support of a third party, and I know we want to save money and I know that it's costly. Trust me, I've dealt with companies that are mom and pops. I've dealt with the Walmarts. I've dealt with, all the different levels of companies. And what it really boils back down to is get it done right the first time. And it's going to be a little painful. It's like when you take your little medicine injection for the doctor. That initial prick hurts, but after it's done, the work is done. So I would say that to really start business in the United States, you have to have your food safety plan, your HARP-C food safety plan for the United States, not HACCP, but HARP-C. Now you can write that. Your qualified individual on site can write that, or you can hire a third party to get it right and get it done. And something like that can cost you like $1,900. I mean, I'm just giving sticker prices. And then you have to have your labeling done correctly. So you get your label reviewed. That could be another $1,900. And then you have to register your facility. You can go directly with the FDA, but then you have to hire a U.S. agent in order to make that registration happen. So somebody like us, you would hire. Something like that can cost you anywhere from $400 to $600. And I'm throwing out these numbers. And like I said, all of those are just sticker ballpark pricing, but to give you an idea. And then you have your registration, your labeling, your food safety plan. And then usually people want to do with some type of third party audit on themselves. So they do a GFSI audit of some sort. I don't even know what that costs. So that's BRC, SQF, or FSSC 22,000. So once you've done all of that, you're ready to go. But the registration, literally, if you come to us and say, we need a registration, we've had people come to us for a registration and they have a shipment en route and it wasn't registered. We can get it registered within 24 to 48 hours. Registration is not an approval. So really all you're doing is submitting your information to FDA saying that we are going to do business. Now, one thing that now will complicate the registration, will take a little longer, is FDA saying you have to have that unique facility identifier, the UFI. So in that case, that could take 3 weeks. You're going to Dun & Bradstreet to get this number that verifies your address, your activities at that address. And so they have to do a little due diligence on their side. And they're backed up now because FDA just made this mandate that all of these companies around the world that have an FDA registration must have a UFI, which must come from Dun & Bradstreet. So you can imagine they're backed up. So we help companies with that whole registration process and package it all together and say, we'll take care of it. We'll get your DUNS number. We'll get your registration. We'll act as your U.S. agent. It all is one-stop shop. But you can do this on your own, and you can go around and look for all these pieces and parts, put them together, and get it done.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Lovely, Curly. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your insights with us. Some people have asked for your contact details. I don't know if you want to share that on the chat.
Oh, yes.
Please do so. Great. So next up is, let's get it out. There we go. Here we go. So next up we have Rowan King. As mentioned, Rowan is one of our experts on the customer support services program. But we've been working with Rowan for many years. He's helped us get products into markets all over the world. Rowan is a dedicated and highly motivated and hardworking professional. He has 17 years of experience in logistics. I can vouch for this as well. He is very resilient, often gets products to markets when we expect them not getting there from very, very late approvals. The last one was to a group to Singapore, and he managed to get products in a few days, which was, we were all surprised when they arrived there and extremely excited about it. But yeah, he's super persistent, and yeah, a lot of experience, understands multiple products and across multiple industries, working across exhibition freight as well. You know, you're dealing with so many different types of products from so many different companies, different size companies as well, which is always quite challenging. And look, his key strengths is pretty much to provide expert advice for potential imports and exports of products. I'm going to hand over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen and then hand over to you, Rowan. Thank you for joining us again and giving us your insight.
Great, thanks a lot, Rex. Thank you for the opportunity. I think I'm just going to jump right into it. Okay, so the documentation requirements, the FDA. Okay. So the importance of having the correct documentation. This is obviously very important. Typical documents that you do require if you want to export, that would be the commercial invoice, the packing list, certificate of origin, certificate of analysis, safety data sheet, certification testing, health certificates, and the FDA registration. Typical example of a commercial invoice. We did this at the previous webinar. I'm just going to run through these quickly. It's just got your basic, your shipper address, your consignee or your shipper's details, your consignee details, contact details, very important, your Incoterms, port of entry, your description. Very important is your harmonized tariff code, also known as a HS code. These are everything that you would need to put onto your invoice. The packing list, it's very similar to the details on the packing lists. It's very similar to the commercial invoice. Like I said, the same details apply, but you need to list the item spec per box. In a lot of cases, the people just list the items, but they don't break it down to exactly how it's been packed. So you need to list these per box and then list the length, width, the height to get the cubic meters, as well as the weights, and then a full description of the goods as required. It's also very important that these documents do tie up the weights and the descriptions. We've had cases in the past where goods were sent to the US and the original documents had to be provided. Unfortunately, on the description, there was a bit of a difference. Not too serious, but it meant that they had to issue new documentation. And like I said, the original documents were required. So it took a couple of days to send these by courier to get them to the US. And this led to unfortunate storage charges at the time. The certificate of origin, this can be obtained from your Chamber of Commerce. It certifies the country where it's a document that certifies the country where the goods in a shipment were produced and is required for customs clearance in many international transactions. Again, this needs to correspond with your commercial invoice as well as your packing list. The certificate of analysis, this is the required for some of the food items, but mostly for your cosmetics as well. This is very important. It's just a document that confirms the quality and the composition of a particular batch or lot of goods, and is often required in industries such as the pharmaceuticals and food production. Yeah, I think it's important to note that the specific requirements for certificate of analysis may vary depending on the type of item, the intended use, and the applicable regulations. The FDA may also have additional requirements or documentation requests for specific product or situations. Importers should work closely with their suppliers and testing laboratories to ensure that the certificate of origin the certificate of analysis contains all the necessary information which meets the FDA requirements. Just to mention this to you, I put two examples here of goods that we've exported in the past. This can be obtained from a testing laboratory like Merimex or Microchem, which is some of the local companies here in South Africa. We do get a lot of products that have been tested by them, and it basically gives you the breakdown of the testing of your product. Again, depending on the product and the appropriate paperwork, the testing laboratory can give you an indication on how long the process takes to finalize the certificate of analysis. It's difficult to give a timeline on this as it varies per product as well. So that's it for the certificate of analysis. For the safety data sheet. Now the safety data sheet, it's got different headings or sections, but it comes down to the transport information. So when we send goods, depending what it is, in a case where it's cosmetics, 90% of the time, the airlines or the shipping lines would require the safety data sheet. The safety data sheet is very important because it's got the transport information on there. In a case where the items might be considered dangerous goods, it needs to be dangerous goods packed into the appropriate boxes as per the regulations. And if a dangerous goods declaration is then issued for the specific product. So very important to have these as well. There's some of the certification testing. These are a couple of companies that provide testing, inspection, certification, and other quality assurance services for various industries and products. A certification test of goods is a process of inspection, testing, and verification, which ensures that the good meet a certain quality, safety, and regulatory standards. The safety data sheet can be obtained from some of the companies that I've listed here. But again, the timeline, depending on the product, the appropriate paperwork, these companies can give you an indication of how long the process takes to finalize the final safety data sheet. For FSSC, HACCP, that's more for your food items, but for your cosmetics, it also goes to the SGS, Intertek, and Bureau Veritas. Are just some of the companies that can assist you with that. From Coley's side, what you mentioned earlier about the new regulations for cosmetics, me myself, I was unaware that this is in the pipeline coming soon. So I think if you're planning on exporting any cosmetics items, it's important just to do a check on what exactly is required. Health certificates. This is in our country, in South Africa, it obviously may vary for other African countries, but these are typically health certificates that are required. On the left, we've got a phytosanitary certificate, which is mostly for tea products, and also your raw plant materials. But we do get these, we export a lot of tea as well, and this is basically one of the first certificates that needs to be applied for. Then on the right, this is from the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, which also lists the product being exported. And without this health certificate, it is nearly impossible to get it imported on the other side. And most of the time, this is a big requirement as well. So ensure your health certificates are applied for. These can be obtained from your local government departments, such as the departments I just mentioned. Now, I think the importance of the FDA for freight forwarder. This comes to, from what I've experienced, 4 different sections as well, which is firstly compliance. The FDA regulates the various aspects of food, drug and medical devices and other products. The certificate also outlines the specific items covered by the FDA, ensuring the compliance with relevant regulations. Now, for us as freight forwarders, we need this information. This is just to ensure that the goods being shipped align with the FDA's requirements. The documentation, which I just ran through now, and the customs clearance, again, the FDA registration, it's an essential document that will be requested by the customs authorities to verify the compliance of the goods. The shipment planning, different goods have different requirements and the restriction imposed by the FDA. So it's difficult to pinpoint this to one specific product. But just to give you guys an example, certain food items may require the specific handling, temperature control, or labeling to comply with the FDA regulations. By knowing the FDA certificate or registration, it covers the freight forwarder, or it covers the freight forwarder can plan and arrange appropriate transportation and storage conditions to ensure compliance and just preserve the integrity of the goods during transit. Then the risk management, non-compliance with the FDA regulations. Yeah, it's difficult because these can lead to different issues, delays, storage costs. We've seen fines implemented in the past, and even confiscation of your goods, or your goods need to be returned back to origin. But I think just by understanding the scope of the FDA, we can identify any potential compliance issues or risks associated with the shipment. It just makes it easier for us as well. If we've got the full information, I see there's quite a lot of regulations. Like I said, it varies from product to product, but the FDA registration covers and ensures the regulatory compliance, the facilitation of the customs clearance, and just to plan your shipment effectively and manage the potential risks so that you don't run into any issues when shipping your goods. What are the risks involved if my products do not meet the FDA requirements? So these are just few examples that we we've had that in the past, not all of them, but if your goods do not meet the requirements, like Polly mentioned earlier, there'll be a warning letter. It can lead to the products being seized or product recall, legal actions, import refusals, and the impact on your business. I think the impact on your business is very important, because in some cases you might put all your money into one order and thinking you're going to make it selling these products to the US, but if you do not meet these requirements, it might end up costing you your company as well. So just very important to look at that. Now, in the past, we've had some cases with labeling issues. This is actually one of the slides that Carly had in her presentation as well. But we had a case like this the other day where we sent a shipment, FH shipment to Dallas for food items. At that point, the exporter was unaware that there was a change from the original label to the new label. And they've been exporting to the US for many, many years. They also went through the FTA registration process, which according to them took them 36 months or three years to obtain. And they've exported to the US often, but unfortunately they weren't aware of the label that had to be changed. So when the goods arrived there, it was inspected by customs as well as the FTA. It did not meet the requirements, so it led to them having to print new labels, sending the labels over to the other side, going to the airport, putting the new labels on product by product. So that was a bit of an issue, because the goods ended up at the airline for close to 2 weeks, with quite a big amount of storage costs involved. So I think this is definitely a lesson that they learned. And I don't see them having that issue in the future. Just a few things that I saw as well, labeling gone wrong. Like Cody said, very important, as well as Audrey. It's so important to ensure that your labels are correct. These are typical examples of goods that have been imported in the past. But just the one on the right is a bit of comic relief, with the misspelling of the word bird. So yes, these have been a few cases, like I mentioned, that we had before. And from our side, I think the important part is a lot of the guys, you get people, especially on social media, you have your product, you've got good marketing skills, and there's definitely interest in your product as well. I think the good thing about the social media is that it puts you in touch with people all around the world. And we had a case the other day as well where there was a lot of interest in the US for certain food item that these guys wanted to export. They got the quantities right, and they had a buyer that wanted to buy the goods, but unfortunately for them, they never registered with the FDA. So they had their goods produced, they had the packing of the goods, everything was right, until they got to the point where they actually had to export, and they got all these apprisals. So I referred them to the Registrar Corp as well, just to guide them on the import requirements for the US at the time. Then just here's my contact details. If there's any questions or anything that you like to ask, or send me an email offline afterwards, I'll be happy to assist you. And then if there's any questions or answers, please let me know.
Yeah, great, thanks, Ron. Thanks for your time again today. And yeah, I often say to Ron, please, the key thing for people to know is actually what documents they have to have together each time they are going to ship something out, because whenever we are sending groups of companies overseas, it always comes down to a few of the guys holding everything back because someone hasn't got a document from their Department of Health, or hasn't sent the right information on the commercial invoice, etc. So yeah, always good to go through those basic requirements, because when you start exporting your product as well, if you don't have certain basic things in place, it's impossible for Rowan to do his job and get your product into market. Teresa, you've made a comment there. How would exporters be made aware of any US or FDA changes? I'm not sure if, Rowan, that's something that you want to try to tackle.
Yeah, well, Alex, I think it makes it a bit difficult. Obviously, we export a lot of products, different products. It's not like the manufacturers that they've just got the one product that they produce and export. So it's difficult to say. But what we usually do is, before we send a shipment to the US, so we've got partners or agents in different states in the US, and we try and get all or start with the commercial invoice and packing list firstly, so we know exactly what products are being sent. So we'll send this off to our agent in the US, who are quite aware of the latest changes, and then they guide us accordingly on what exactly is required. But just to add to the shipment that we had the other day, is with the change of labeling, it also comes down to your Incoterms as well. So with this specific company, we only had to, the terms were free carrier or FCA, so we only had to ship up to the airport. From there, the importer, they had their clearing agent that handles the import. But we exported it up to the airport. So I think in that case, you don't want to point any fingers, but it came down to their clearing agent, who was the one clearing the goods. They were where the goods were being sent there, but again, unaware of the changes. So we try and keep in close contact with our partners in the US as well, just to ensure that the exact product being sent does meet any requirements, or if there are any changes, they'll be able to assist us.
Great. Anything that you've seen on your side from sort of an FDA point, where someone may have the FDA certificate in place, their registration, and they're ready to go, but there's something else that is as kind of, everyone thinks, you've got your FDA registration now, I'm fine to go. I'm going to start sending my product overseas. Anything that you've seen that's sort of jumped out of there once they're ready to export and they have that set?
Yes, definitely. We've seen cases in the past where the guys do register with the FDA, but after that, the HACCP or the FSSC, the registration or approvals weren't in place. So they were under the impression, as soon as they registered for the FDA or with the FDA, that they're good to go. And until such time, luckily, the goods did not depart from here as yet. And our agent warned us that, it's all good and well that they've got their registration, but they haven't got any of the other requirements in place. So, you know, that made it a bit difficult as well, because again, the goods were packed, ready to go, and they were unable to send it until they sorted the rest of the goods out.
Okay. Well, that's interesting as well. Yeah, you can't just rely on being FDA registered to, and that's the be all and end all of getting your products to the US. You have to follow other protocol as well and ensure that's all there. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Rowan. I think that's all for questions today. Next up, we will have, let me get him up onto screen. It will be Eckhard Naumann from, oh, it's not allowing me to share. There we go. Is Eckhard Naumann from Trelleck. Eckhard, thanks for joining us today, Eckhard. Just give a basic intro to Eckhard. He's an economist. He's based in South Africa. His research and consulting work spans a range of sectors and subjects, with a focus on market access issues and rules of origin, where he assisted the SADC, EAC, ESA, and West Africa EPA programs in their preparations for negotiating revised rules of origin with the EU. He has also had a particular interest in USA-Africa trade and AGOA, and has been involved in many research and related capacity building activities in his field through the years. He has created the AGOA.info platform, which we use a lot, and we drive people to throughout this program. And he did this at the time, right back when AGOA's inceptions 2 decades ago, which he continues to manage. And I know they're doing a large project at the moment, revising a lot of things. A lot of it's mostly done to AGOA.info. And just updating this and making it easier and simpler for people to access that information through AGOA. Eckhard works for Trelleck, which is the Trade Law Center. He's an associate there. And it's, as mentioned, it's currently supported by the USA Prosper Africa Program, Africa Trade and Investment Initiative. We work very closely and get advice from Eckhard all the time. So thank you, Eckhard, again for joining us. I'll let you share your screen now and give us some more information on a basic understanding of AGOA's key provisions and some practical steps to establish product eligibility and tariff classification. Yours.
Okay. Just had to find the unmute button. Can you hear me, Rex, or everyone?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Rex. Thanks for the long intro. That was far longer than I would have wanted. But much appreciated, and thank you for your all your I don't want to use the word enthusiasm, but there is obviously a lot of enthusiasm for your energy you put into promoting those linkages and AGOA and everything around it. You do great work, and your passion is palpable. So thank you very much for that. And also thank you to the previous two speakers. I found those two presentations absolutely fascinating and fantastic. And always, I'm always on the learning curve. So especially on the nitty gritty bolts of trading, which a lot of it, not being a trader myself, that is certainly very interesting. Now, just I am coming here into it at the end of it, but obviously it links into the discussion early on. Of course the logistics. I mean, I heard the previous presentation already, and I'm again likewise. I'm still on a learning curve on some of the nitty gritty on exporting. And obviously it's very technical, and I do appreciate Ron, those insights that you shared with us. Rex asked me to talk about two things basically, and I'm going to marry them into one fairly brief presentation. One, on the one hand, given the topic of exporting and focus on America, the kind of the program that makes it easier, not absolutely necessary and not essential, but certainly easier to export to the American market, and that's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So I'll be talking a little bit about that, the nuts and bolts of that, the key characteristics, the key requirements, and kind of taking a brief look into the future. As many of you probably know, at this stage, AGOA is set to expire in September 2025. So we've got a little bit over 2 years left of this program as it stands. There are rumblings about some changes and extensions and so on, but until that actually happens, it's a matter of Congress to decide. At this stage, AGOA expires at the end of September 2025. And then, more importantly, and at a much more practical level, given the audience as well, is just using some of the tools, some of the easily available tools, how to establish whether your product, and that is kind of essentially a question that Rex always has, and kind of a bit of a central theme, ensuring whether your product is AGOA eligible in the first place, and how do you check that? And linked to that is, how do you check your classification code for that product, because those two are obviously very linked. Without the classification code, you cannot establish your AGOA eligibility. And with that, there are various ways of using online tools, download tools, documents, but I'm going to just walk you through on just an easy way of establishing that in the last couple of slides. And we'll do a practical example. Now, let me just move on my presentation. Yeah, so in terms of the 2 points, and I don't need to kind of repeat much of this now, is really just a brief overview of the key features of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which makes your products more competitive in the United States market, or in most instances, certainly. And secondly, just those practical considerations and tools available to you free of charge, how to establish your product's AGOA eligibility status and classification code. Now, briefly just starting, and again, just painting a bit of a framework picture. Many of you will be fairly familiar with this, probably, especially those that are already exporting. But again, it's always worth mentioning again, you might be the exporter, but on the other side of the coin is a US importer, and the US importer does a lot of the paperwork and a lot of the clearing into the United States commerce, and is also essentially the party that claims the preference. So you might consider yourself the indirect beneficiary of AGOA. It makes your products more competitive to the buyer, but the buyer claims the preference, and unless you are also the importer into the US directly. But it's the buyer, your buyer, that ultimately benefits directly from a preferential arrangement. So on the one hand, obviously, AGOA is much more than just something that gives African produced products better access to the United States market. It is a platform for non-reciprocal meaning the United States is giving African beneficiary countries this preference, not vice versa. It's not a trade agreement. It is not something that is negotiated. It is a part of US legislation that provides preferential market access to a large number of products into the United States if they are manufactured in an eligible beneficiary sub-Saharan African country. And I'll say something more on that in the next slide, I think. It is also a forum for deeper US-Africa engagement. So it's much more than only about providing trade preferences. It's literally a forum. The AGOA legislation mandates an annual forum where the private sector, civil society, and governments get together. That has fallen away slightly, or rather has taken place in a slightly different format over the last 2-3 years because of COVID, but certainly before then, and expected to be this year again in South Africa. The AGOA Forum brings together a lot of people, and there's also a lot of matchmaking at the forum. So certainly, something that was alluded to early on, the importance of that. The forum is certainly the private sector aspects of the forum are an important vehicle for that, and that is facilitated by the AGOA legislation. It is a channel for technical development and business support, and this is not to be sniffed at. The United States is investing heavily in this relationship and provides a lot of assistance. There were some mentions of, for example, of the Trade Hub. The Trade Hubs are because of the AGOA legislation. There are changes in the format of the support at the moment. So, for example, the trade hubs as they used to exist have come to an end, but it's been taken over essentially in a slightly different format called Africa Trade and Investment, or falls under the Prosper Africa banner. And it is basically a mechanism that brings together a lot of organizations and stakeholders and government departments to deliver an even better support structure to particularly to African exporters. So it's both development, technical, and business support. And in fact, the reason why we are here together falls into this category, the support that is provided through the United States Agency for International Development. And then, of course, helping facilitate US-Africa investment. That is something that the United States has become more and more keen on over the last couple of years, that it is not simply a matter of getting African countries to export to the United States, but also facilitating US investment in Africa. And it all falls under this broad AGOA banner and collaboration. In terms of the history, and again, this is quite a dense looking slide, and I'm not going to spend much time on it, but the most important takeaway is AGOA has been around since 2000, so it's been literally 23 years of preferences, non-reciprocal preferences available to exporters, but it is coming to an end as it stands on the 30th of September in 2025. So not that much time to go. It is not the only preference scheme there is or has been over the years. There's also the generalized system of preferences, and I'll say something about that because it is something that is still being misunderstood quite a bit. And the reason why I say it's being misunderstood is because US importers or US import agents are still clearing goods under the GSP into the United States from African AGOA beneficiary countries. And the GSP is currently not authorized. In other words, no preferences are possible under this. There'll be a delay in obtaining any preferential entry if you are clearing goods under the GSP. Those same products can also be cleared under AGOA, and you get your immediate duty-free access. But a sizable amount of trade is still taking place under GSP on paper, with no preferences being available to the importer and by extension to the exporter. Those products are not as competitive in the US markets as they should be. The countries that have a color are those countries that are currently AGOA eligible. There are 35 countries as of 2023. One country lost its AGOA eligibility at the beginning of this year, and 3 countries lost their AGOA eligibility status at the end of the previous year. And that is for not complying with AGOA's eligibility requirements, which are quite extensive. There was a slide early on where some of these were alluded to. It's beyond what I want to focus on today, but certainly AGOA is non-reciprocal, but it's not unconditional. If countries do not meet these AGOA eligibility requirements, the rule of respect for the rule of law, and for example, allowing unionization and political pluralism and all kinds of about 8 or 9 categories of criteria, they do run the risk of being suspended as an AGOA beneficiary status. And it is something that has happened to a couple of countries. So that is the current situation. If it's a country that is not gray, it is AGOA eligible. There are different categories of AGOA eligible countries in terms of only one provision, and those are the textiles and clothing provisions. So separate regulations apply to textiles and clothing exports, and a country needs to implement a AGOA visa system or textile visa system. They're called the wearing apparel provisions. And only a country that has satisfied the United States that it has implemented such a system may export textiles and clothing under AGOA preference. So if it is a blue country, it has a light blue country, it is AGOA eligible. Those countries in kind of from Angola northwards, and 1 or 2 in West Africa and Djibouti as well in the east, and Rwanda as well. Those countries are AGOA eligible for everything but textiles and clothing. The dark blue countries are AGOA eligible for all their products, or all AGOA eligible products, including textiles and clothing. And South Africa is a different color for the reason that the rules of origin, the local manufacturing requirements, the local content requirements, if you're an exporter from South Africa, are quite different to those from the other AGOA eligible countries. South Africa was considered to be too advanced to be benefiting from the so-called third country fabric provisions, and has to use locally made fabric or fabric sourced from another AGOA country, made in another AGOA country, which in turn also has to be made from African-made yarn. So it's effectively a triple transformation requirement for African or South African exporters versus the other AGOA eligible countries that can source fabrics from anywhere in the world and are also allowed to export textiles, in other words, fabrics and yarns and so on, to the United States duty-free. So that is the picture, 35 countries. What also is maybe something I should mention here is under the accumulation provisions of AGOA, you do have the rules of origin require that you need to have a certain amount of local content. And effectively, and it's more technical than that, but 35% local content is the requirement to be an AGOA eligible product. It's got to be on the list, but also it has to be made in that AGOA eligible country. In other words, 35% of the cost of materials and processing has to be local. The rules of origin for textile and clothing, as I mentioned, are a little bit different. But those 35% don't necessarily have to be only from national sources. They can also be from other AGOA beneficiary sources. So a South African company could, for argument's sake, source certain materials from Botswana or Lesotho or Namibia and use it as locally made, local content in order to fulfill the 35% minimum content rule. But again, also, today is not about the rules of origin, but I think it is worth mentioning in terms of the broader picture of what makes the product potentially AGOA eligible. It has to be on the list of AGOA eligible products, and it has to be originating in the exporting country. And how does it originate? It originates if it is at least 35% local content, and that's made up of materials and processing costs. Let me just move on to the next slide. Yeah. Okay. Now, in terms of what products are AGOA eligible, or what is the scale of AGOA preferences, it is quite vast. It does not cover all products, but I think in this little very basic chart that I tried to knock up in a very, very simple way, the important thing is if you're an exporter in an AGOA eligible country, is that red bar at the top. 3% of total tariff lines, and that's only about 250 tariff lines in total. Only those are still dutiable if exported from an AGOA country. So of the 11,000 or so, 11,500 or whatever it is, the exact number, of possible tariff lines, possible products that can be exported into the United States, only 3% are still dutiable if it's coming from an AGOA eligible country, like South Africa or Namibia or Kenya. Now, a fairly large percentage, the green bar, are those that are duty-free anyway. They do not need AGOA. They are duty-free irrespective of where they come from. So that's another 37%. 60%, the important thing, AGOA or AGOA GSP, as I have, /GSP. And I only have it as /GSP because those products also, or many of those products, have the special program indicator of the GSP as part of the US tariff code. Does not mean GSP is currently valid. And in fact, if you try to import, as I mentioned earlier on, under GSP, you will not be able to claim a preference at the moment, or certainly whatever preference there is will be held by US Customs and will only be paid out to you whenever the GSP gets reauthorized. It's been expired for over 2 years already. Okay, so that's quite important to know. The dark blue, so the blue bars, the light blue and the dark blue are AGOA categories. Roughly 6,700 tariff lines are made up, are represented by these two bars. Round about 5,000 are AGOA and GSP. So if you're in GSP eligible country like Thailand or another country, you can claim duty-free access to the United States. Or if you're from South Africa, you can claim duty-free access, or rather maybe I'm not going to use South Africa as an example because there's a rider on that, and I'll mention that just now. But if you're Lesotho, you can also, those GSP tariff lines are eligible, doesn't matter, in the presence of AGOA or not, those are duty-free into the United States. They also have been bolted on or retrofitted with an AGOA indicator. In other words, you can clear them, or the US importer can clear them under AGOA and under GSP. It does not matter. The impact is the same normally, except at the moment, during the expiry of the GSP, only AGOA can be used if you want to claim that preference. The light blue are those products that have been added by the AGOA legislation in 2000, so 23 years ago. There are roughly 1,800 tariff lines, which are not GSP duty-free, but are duty-free under AGOA. So the combined total between the two is around about 6,700, and of which roughly 5,000 are GSP and roughly 1,750 are those that are only eligible if exported from an AGOA country. And that's kind of almost where the additional benefit of AGOA lies, ignoring for a moment the fact that the GSP has expired. And I'll return to this a little bit later in terms of just a possible future scenario. What happens if AGOA does not get expired? What does this chart going to look like then for South Africa and Kenya, for example, because those countries are not considered least developed countries, and for other AGOA beneficiary countries. Okay, now just one slide briefly on the GSP, and the GSP is always very prominent in discussions and also the support offered by USAID at the moment under this current program with Africa, the African Trade Investment Project. So the GSP precedes the African Growth and Opportunity. The GSP has been around since the 1970s, and it basically removed import duties on roughly, as it stands at the moment, around about 5,000 tariff lines. Now, what AGOA does is it attaches this SPI, Special Program Indicator, and that is essentially just an entry in the US tariff book. When you look up the duty-free statement status of your product, you will look out for a D indicator or an A for GSP. The GSP has an A indicator and the AGOA has a D indicator. If it's a D indicator, it is eligible for AGOA, and that is what must be used. Do not use the GSP at the moment. And in fact, don't use it ever in the presence while there's AGOA. It just will cause difficulties. The GSP is also something that needs to be reauthorized much more regularly than what AGOA has had to over the last couple of years. It expands the GSP coverage. So the 5,000 products that African countries, for example, and others were eligible for, expanded by 1,700 tariff lines to give us a total of roughly 6,750 tariff lines. So it's around about 5,050 GSP lines, add 1,700 under AGOA, extra under AGOA gives you a combined total of 6,750 plus minus of tariff lines into the United States that have the AGOA D indicator in the tariff book. In other words, they qualify for AGOA preferences. What AGOA also did is incorporated many sensitive products. So many products that the US has, out of principle, never allowed duty-free into its market are now part of AGOA. So there are quite a number of those, a couple of hundred of those. And then also, what is quite important, and that is especially for countries like South Africa and Kenya and countries that are not considered LDC countries, least developed countries, AGOA is in fact, I think I have it as a bullet point just now. I'm not going to jump the gun on this one. Yeah, and what it also does is it removes the so-called competitive need limits. And what the GSP does is, if a country exceeds a certain amount of products being imported in a certain category or in a certain product line into the United States in a given year, there's a risk of it being gradiated, that product being gradiated out of GSP preference status. So, for example, South Africa is a big exporter of oranges or a big exporter of macadamia nuts, as is Kenya, for example. Kenya and South Africa together account for 80% of the US import market of macadamia nuts. It's all going under AGOA. If it were going under the GSP, there'd be a good chance that those products would be gradiated out of the preference program, and that preferential status would be lost, and normal duties would apply. So AGOA does away with these CNLs, which, I mean, it's not a big issue in most categories, but certainly in some, as I've just mentioned, it would be an issue. South Africa has also at times been such a big export of oranges to the United States under AGOA, where it had almost 50% of the US import market. This is quite a few years back, because I tracked the data quite carefully over the years. But at some point, it was well over 40% of the US import market of oranges. That would run afoul of GSP rules quite quickly. The rules of origin, as I mentioned just now, very groundbreaking. They've never before been such flexible rules of origin for clothing. We could use fabric sourced from anywhere in the world, only have to make up the garment locally, and it qualifies under AGOA. And bearing in mind that apparel has very high import duties into the United States. Many of those are the late 20s, if not 30% US import duties. Now, again, the exception here being South Africa. South Africa does not have the same flexible rules of origin for apparel. The longer time horizon, so the first initially AGOA was from 2000 to 2008, then 12, 15, and 25. Unlike the GSP, which generally tends to expire every 2 years, and then in about 6 or 7 of those times, so the last 20 years, the GSP expired before Congress acted and reauthorized it, meaning for a couple of months or longer, as at the moment, it's almost 2.5 years. There is no GSP, and importers cannot claim any preference at all, but they have AGOA as a fallback. What AGOA does not do, it does not remove import quotas. The United States does maintain a system of import quotas in various product categories, for example, tobacco and butter and cheese and especially agricultural products, sugar. Those are not taken away by AGOA, or peanut butter and peanut butter paste. Those are all subject to a quota. And some of those quotas have been utilized, fully utilized in a particular year, which means once it's out of a quota, it's a so-called tariff rate quota. Once it's out of quota, much higher import duties, or the duty-free status falls away effectively, and fairly high import duties are due. So AGOA does not do away with it. Trade remedy rules, those in South Africa might have been reading in the news how we have anti-dumping duties on our lemon juice exports, following a kind of a year-long investigation where South African exporters were found to be selling at less than fair value into the United States market, and they received a 75% import duty, punitive import duty, anti-dumping duty on their goods. So those things also don't fall away through the AGOA legislation, meaning when you sell to the US market, do not sell less than at fair value. And in particular, do not sell less than what you're selling in your local market for, because you would very quickly run the risk of being considered to be dumping your goods in the US market. And then, of course, countries, as I mentioned earlier on, meeting the eligibility requirements. That is an ongoing thing. It is something that those in South Africa will know. It's been in the news quite a bit. There's been a lot of very poor reporting on the subject, but certainly there is a risk at the moment that South Africa is not fully complying with the AGOA eligibility requirements. And one of those requirements is not to undermine US foreign policy interests. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole and talk about that now, but it is a concern whether South Africa could lose its AGOA status at some point over something as such as that. Let me go. Okay. In terms of the link between AGOA and the GSP, and I've covered quite a bit of this now in the last couple of slides, but I think another important thing, especially if you're a South African exporter, is that what AGOA does not do is it does not use a differentiated approach, unlike the GSP. So the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, which has been around since the 1970s, it does not offer the same tariff product coverage. It's duty-free status, but the same product coverage, the same scale of benefits, or the same scope of benefits as AGOA does, and it's certainly not the same as to all countries in a consistent way. There are essentially 3 types of the GSP. There's a general GSP, which consists of around about 3,500 tariff lines out of the 5,100 tariff lines. There's a LDC only GSP component, which is another 1,500, 1,600 tariff lines, which is reserved for exports from least developed countries. And then there are a couple of tariff lines where certain countries are excluded, for example, because they've been gradiated out or they've hit the competitive need limits and so on. That's not so important now, but certainly the first two. The first one is South Africa's GSP is only 3,500 tariff lines. Compare that with AGOA, which covers 6,700 tariff lines. So it is really a very small, insignificant, or almost insignificant comparison with what AGOA does. For LDCs, the coverage is much broader. So the full GSP applies for LDCs for a country like Lesotho and Namibia and Botswana and Malawi and so on, Mozambique. Those countries have the full LDC when it is in existence, when it is authorized. At the moment, it is not authorized, so there is no GSP at all. But just in terms of context, thinking forward as a potential fallback position, is all lost if there wasn't AGOA? Certainly not, but I'll address that point shortly. Now, looking ahead, before we go to slightly more practical parts of the presentation, And yeah, so the current expiry is September 25. There is a lot of talk about an extension. This obviously, 2 years to go, that is kind of getting to that time where importers and exporters want to have that certainty, and policy statements, a policy direction needs to be provided by the United States. It is a program that not only African exporters benefit from, but US importers benefit just as much from. It's always two sides to the coin. A trade transaction has benefits and beneficiaries on both sides of the coin. The importer, consumer, the consumer in the importing country, the exporter, staff, etc. There are a lot of beneficiaries to trade. It is not only the exporter that benefits from a preference program such as AGOA. So there is talk about a possible extension, but it is, I can't speculate. I'm obviously, hopeful that there will be an extension because AGOA does not cost the United States much. Total US imports from AGOA countries are less than 1%. Total exports. That's not just the AGOA component, but total US imports from AGOA beneficiary countries last year were about 0.9% of total US imports. So it's a very small program in terms of the bigger picture. Doesn't cost the United States anything in terms of loss of revenue or loss of import duties. There's a small cost to continuing something such as AGOA, but it is up to the US Congress to consider. There is obviously the political dimension. A couple of things being considered, not just South Africa. That is just a very small part of it, but those east of Africa, China, Russia, and so on, they're all interested in Africa, and all interested in forging closer ties and having greater influence in Africa. And that is definitely weighing very heavily on the United States. Would they want to give that up? And would they want to concede that? I suspect absolutely not. And there's absolutely no reason why AGOA will not be reauthorized, but who knows? But it is certainly something that will be weighing on the US Congress as it considers these questions. The annual AGOA eligibility review, if you want to make a submission, you're welcome to. That process has recently been opened a couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago. In fact, all the details are on the AGOA.info website if you want to find them on the front page towards the bottom. How do you make a submission if you have a particularly strong view on something, on renewal or particular country's renewal, South Africa's renewal? Please do participate in that process. It is taken quite seriously. There are hearings, there are online hearings. One can make it just a paperwork, a written submission, but they all are considered when the United States considers its reauthorization of the country eligibility list for next year. The process starts now and will take a couple of months. There was an AGOA eligibility, or rather AGOA general review that was published about a month and a half ago. That took place over the last year and a bit, a large investigation. And essentially in a nutshell, the report found, it's a very long report, 300 pages, but it found that the impact of AGOA has been mixed. For some countries and some sectors, it has been significant. Overall, the impact has not been as much over the years as the United States would have liked to and wanted to. Now, that's either a good or bad thing if one thinks ahead in terms of what is the United States or what is Congress going to do with this information. One way of seeing it is maybe they will improve AGOA. Maybe they will maybe there will be special quotas for AGOA beneficiary countries, which are extended, even though quotas are not a major issue. But should the rules of origin be made even simpler? Should the 35% threshold be lowered to 25%, for example, or whatever? There are various ways of, or should there just be more support for AGOA beneficiary countries to better utilize those preferences? And then fallback position, and that is just going back, what happens if AGOA expires? How do South African exporters, Malawian exporters, where do they stand? And I just have this little chart that I had earlier on. I've just extended it a little bit about what would happen under the current situation if AGOA was gone, but assuming that the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, has been reauthorized by now. It's never been unauthorized for as long as it has now, and they've been trying to reauthorize it, but it is a very politically fraught Congress at the moment, and getting anything done that requires support from both sides of the ale is quite difficult, especially on fairly contentious subjects such as international trade and non-reciprocal trade preferences. But there are a lot of pushes to reauthorize the GSP. Now, the situation for a country like South Africa and Kenya will be vastly different, or significantly different to all the other countries, AGOA countries. And that is because the GSP for the non-LDC beneficiary countries like South Africa and Kenya are not as favorable as those for LDCs. So the situation, if AGOA is lost, or if South Africa even loses AGOA status before then, the situation is that obviously the general duty-free products, which are around about 4,500 tariff lines, they stay, they are unaffected. That's the green bar in the middle. The blue at the bottom currently is AGOA and GSP. With AGOA falling away, only GSP remains. For South Africa, that means 3,500 tariff lines. For other countries, for the LDC countries, that means 5,000 tariff lines would still be eligible for duty-free access to the United States. Under the belt, or under the line, the net sum, 30% of South Africa and Kenya's exports to the United States would be subject to a duty. That is assuming that the GSP has been reauthorized. Otherwise, it would be, and I'm just looking at my numbers at the moment, it would be 70%, 30 and 33, 63% of products would be subject to a duty. If in the presence of a GSP reauthorization and there not being AGOA, 30% of total products would be dutiable, the rest would be duty-free. And for LDC countries, only 17% would be dutiable, the rest would be duty-free. Including in those dutiable products would be textiles and clothing, for example, and that would be a massive problem for some of our neighboring countries like Lesotho and Eswatini and Malawi and so on, Madagascar. So the impacts would be quite serious, but for a country, certainly the impacts would be far more significant than for other countries. So just something to mull over. I wish I had a crystal ball to know exactly what is going to happen, whether AGOA is going to be renewed. And I don't really want to speculate, but what I'd like to say is that AGOA benefits both sides of the coin, both sides of the ale, both sides of the Atlantic. For every successful export, there's a successful import and a happy importer and a happy US consumer. So I think that will be weighing on the mind of congressmen as they consider a renewal of AGOA. And of course, the political dimension, I think, is probably the most important dimension. And it is probably less about assisting Africa as opposed to not opening the door too far in that sense, or leaving a void for Russia and China and others to come in and take up the space that the United States has enjoyed in the sense. So I think those are the most important considerations probably going forward. Now, in terms of as an exporter, when you are engaging with a potential US importer, there are two important things that you need to consider. First of all, you need to, apart from everything that we've listened to early on, but purely from a paperwork perspective, from clearing those goods into the United States, the correct HTS classification code of your product, and then using that to determine the AGOA tariff status, AGOA or tariff status of your product. Is it AGOA eligible or not? And otherwise, what is the tariff? That is quite important to know. What the tariff is, are we looking at 27% or is it only 2.5%? Which, given the way the exchange rate has gone over the last year, seems to be a small cost to pay given the additional competitive advantage that the currency devaluation has brought along with it in terms of making products more competitive. What is also quite important, and I know the HS code has been mentioned, and there was a question early on, what is important in terms of the US imports and AGOA trade in particular, is you need the United States HTS classification code to establish the AGOA status of your product, not the South African or Malawian HS code. And maybe just a general code, and I know a common, and this isn't just about codes and classifications today, the HS code system is an international system. Obviously, virtually every country applies it. Its customs applies it, and they use it for trade and trade data and so on and so forth, and labeling requirements and all kinds of other, for all kinds of other reasons, trade remedies and so on. But it is only harmonized up to the 6th digit. In international trade, the 8th and the 10th digit are used, or particularly in the United States, the 10-digit code is used. So the 8th digit code is used to determine the GOA status of a product, but when importing it, there are 10 digits, even if the last two are just 00. There is that last those last two codes, the last two numbers are also important when clearing goods into the United States. And there it does not help using the South African HS code. So if you know the HS code of your product because you've imported such goods in the past, or you've exported such goods to Europe or to Namibia or another country, that is only an indicator, but is most likely not going to be the correct code. The first digits will be right, but not the next couple of digits. So it's important to refer to the US HS code or the HTS code when determining what is the HTS code for the correct product classification code for international trade purposes and customs purposes of your product. You can really ignore the South African code, except to help you along the way to establishing your correct code. The South African code, the South African 8-digit code, will not necessarily be the right code to use. And I think Rowan mentioned early on the potential problems of misclassifying goods and using the incorrect classification code can be dire, can be penalties, can hold up goods, can hold up shipments, can give you a black mark in the CBP and the customs book, and so on and so forth. So it is really important to use a correct and obtain and establish the correct HTS classification code. So what do you do in practice? And assuming now that you're not already familiar with the code for US purposes, ideally start with reviewing the chapter of your product that your product falls into. So the HS system is broken down into effectively 99 chapters, and in each chapter, and it's a very methodological process and system. So for example, textiles and clothing will be in chapters 50 to 60, and then clothing 61 and 62, and then you get wood products in the 40s, and jewelry in 71, and automotives in 87, and machines in chapter 83, and so on. So effectively identify your correct product code initially by starting with the HTS chapter. And you can download that chapter from the United States International Trade Commission website, or you can also find it on the go.info. There's a whole list, and that actually, incidentally, also the document that you are downloading on the go.info is the original document from the United States. It links off the server of the United States. It is not something that is that's just been republished. It is actually a direct link to the United States International Trade Commission, and gets that document from there. So that would normally help you, and it is important not only to to give you a better overview of your sector and the products that fall into that chapter, but also what is quite important is there are a lot of notes in the chapter that have to be read and have to be consulted. So sometimes the notes, for example, give you guidance with classification. I remember looking at I think it was ceramic cutlery or ceramic knives. Is that a ceramic product or is that cutlery? Different chapters, and the guidance is provided in the chapters how to correctly classify a knife with a ceramic blade. Is it a ceramic product or is it a knife? So that guidance is provided by the notes. Very important to refer to those notes. They help you along. And then also just bearing in mind that many tariff lines, especially once you get to the 10th digit level, so the 8th digit is needed to determine the AGOA status of your product and what the import duty is. The 10th digit is required for import purposes, for the paperwork purposes, and bear in mind that many of those last two digits are so-called other, or NESOI, not elsewhere specified or included. So a product might be, a tariff code might have 3 or 4 tariff codes at the 8-digit level for your product or thereabouts. And then if you do not fall into one of those 4, then you would fall into the other. If you are sure, obviously, that you fall within that category or within that heading, and you've worked down that tree, so to speak, of establishing the correct tariff code for your product, and certainly the 10th digit code, there's a good chance that it falls under other or such and such products, not elsewhere specified or included. And that's almost a negative list. If it doesn't fall into the positive list and is specifically defined, it falls into the so-called negative list as part of that same, under that same heading or within the same heading. On the go.info website, there are many ways of skinning this cat and finding this information. So you can certainly go to the United States International Trade Commission. They have what seems to, and what is a little bit of a complex system, but it is entirely possible to review your tariff line and find your correct tariff classification code via that system. Or on the go.info, we've made it a lot simpler, and we've created a tool, which if you navigate to go.info, www.go.info, on the front page or in one of the sub pages, which I'll get to just now, you have a input tool which allows you to search for your correct tariff code, either by inputting the tariff code or part of the tariff code, can be 4-digit, 5-digit, 6-digit that you have, and then you start searching based on that, or a keyword or key phrase or 2-3 words that you have into the second field, sorry, the first field, and the code into the second field. The site is also programmed in such a way that you do not have spaces or dots in between. It forces you to remove them, or rather it removes them automatically for you. So if you have a copy and pasted code that is 10 digits or 8 digits long, but it's got a couple of dots in between, the site automatically removes all of those, the dots, and just enters the pure number. And then you can literally click on start your search, and the system will give you information on any hits based on your search criteria. And not just does it tell you then what is the AGOA status of your product, but also what is the MFN tariff, what is the normal import duty if the product is not AGOA eligible, if it comes from your competitor country, from a competing export in another country, or if it doesn't meet the rules of origin, or something else is not entered correctly on the paperwork that you cannot claim the import duty, or the duty-free status rather, then normal duties are applicable. So that's quite important. It also helps you a little bit with market research. If the normal import duty on a product is 15% or 20%, you can use that information with your importer and your buyer on the United States side in explaining that if you are the exporter, being in an AGOA eligible country, they can claim that 15% import duty, which they cannot claim when importing from another country. So it automatically makes your product more competitive and more attractive to the importer potentially. It's also very mobile friendly, the site. So if you just go via your phone, you'll see there on the screen the top input field is where you can put a keyword in, or alternatively put in a part code or the full code of your product that you think is the correct code, and double check and press start your search, and it'll navigate you to the results field, which we can do in fact, I'll just go to the next page. This is essentially what, if I input the word cocoa, these are the hits, or the tariff lines that contain the word, or some of the tariff lines, I think there are probably a few more than this, tariff lines that contain the word cocoa. Because you have a product with cocoa, you might have a sugar confectionery containing cocoa, or not containing cocoa, or nuts containing cocoa, or not containing cocoa, or yogurt with cocoa in, or whatever. These are just a few. The list is actually much longer on products that contain the word cocoa. So if you're doing a keyword search, this is essentially what the results field would look like. The first one, then you can obviously navigate down a little bit. But you'll see in the far left corner is the HTS code, the 8-digit HTS code. That's the one to determine your AGOA preference status or not. Then there's the full description of your product. Make sure that meets your product, that is the best fit for your product. The next column is the AGOA status. And because this is a static page now, I can't show you the little drop-down menu, but there are a couple of options which I'll show you on a live site just now. The GSP status and MFN tariff. So that's all, and then the actual duty, the MFN tariff. And the MFN duty, just to reiterate again, the MFN duty, MFN is basically, the United States also calls it the NTR, normal tariff relations duty. That is this exports from any country coming to the United States that are not being entered under preference. That's the standard duty There is a so-called column 2 tariff, which applies to North Korea and Russia and Cuba, but we've actually removed that. There was this creating a little bit of unnecessary distraction, and it's not really relevant to exporting from African countries. So essentially, that already gives you a bit of market intelligence on your potential product, because it gives you the AGOA status, the D-AGOA. D is the special program indicator I mentioned earlier on. GSP status, is it also GSP eligible? So a US import can technically claim duty-free status under GSP and under AGOA, or either or rather, except at the moment when the GSP is suspended or has not been reauthorized. And the third one is the import duty that is due if preferences aren't claimed, or secondly, as I mentioned earlier on, if the product does not originate in the exporting countries. In other words, it contains too many non-originating input materials, and it does not meet that 35% local content and processing threshold. So that is quite important. If it does not meet that, but it's still a product being exported by South Africa, it would not fall under AGOA, even if it has the AGOA status, because it is not originating in South Africa. So that's always just something to keep at the back of the mind. But I think this maybe looks a bit abstract. Let's do a quick practical demo over a minute or two. I know we are running out of time, but I'm going to just quickly share, do a new share. Just give me 2 seconds. Okay, I just need to share this. Okay, am I sharing? I think I'm sharing a new page now. At least I hope I am. Otherwise, please, someone shout. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let me just quickly actually navigate back to. I'm just clicking on the AGOA.info logo bit. So on the front page of AGOA.info, you can see there's a lot of information already on the front page. I mentioned earlier on the eligibility review. If you click on here, you get to all the information and the contact details and the requirements for submitting a review or a submission rather. That's a little bit further down, but that's not discussion for today. Here's the tool, how to find and check your AGOA eligibility status. And so, for example, I'm just going to COCA. So I've done it before. It already comes up. And then I can press start your search. And it takes me to the back end, so to speak, the results page that I was on early on. Here are the products. So basically, the first column are the tariff lines. Is the tariff classification code, the 8-digit tariff classification code. Very important. This is to establish the correct AGOA status or not, or preferential status of your product. There's the description. Make sure it matches. You can see how many tariff lines have the word COCA in. I chose one with lots. In fact, there are 80 tariff lines. There's a little number here. 80 tariff lines that have the word COCA in. So just be sure that you choose the correct one. So there, for example, I'm seeing here one product here towards the bottom, chocolate and preparations, whatever. Not AGOA, not GSP, 37.2 cents per kilogram plus 6% is the import duty. So it gives you that kind of information. No preferences can be obtained. But yeah, let's start at the top. So I mentioned earlier on the third column, I couldn't give you a drop-down menu. I'm just clicking on it to show you the drop-down menu and our GSP drop-down menu. So the first one, if it is a D, all products that are AGOA eligible have a D indicator, special program indicator. So you can also do a query, COCA, but you only want to show those that are AGOA eligible. I'm going to do that now. Click on D, and I'm going to click Go again. And now it's filtering only products with the word COCA in with their correct tariff classification codes that contain the word COCA and are AGOA eligible. And the GSP status we have set to all, meaning any GSP program indicator showed up here. We can also have only those that are non-GSP, for example. Let's do that, for example. I'm going to do that quickly now. Press go again. I have to scroll down because I've got the video links here on the right-hand picture. Clicking go. Nothing. Okay. So COCA, there is no COCA product, no product containing the word COCA rather, in the US tariff book that is AGOA eligible, but not GSP eligible. In other words, where does AGOA give me something that GSP does not give? There's nothing, okay? So I'm going to do all again and press OK, and you can see all of those. And in other words, the GSP provides as many preferences as AGOA does for products containing the word cocoa, except, as I mentioned early on, there is no GSP at the moment. So all of these products do not have an AGOA status. They might, sorry, a GSP status. So they might have a special program indicator indicating it is GSP eligible, but only when the GSP is enforced. The GSP is not authorized at the moment. There is no GSP claim to be made. You can only make an AGOA claim if you want to export to the United States duty-free. And here in the final corner are those tariff lines. You can see some of them are very high, 20% and so on is certainly considered very high by international standards for a tariff. What you can also do, you can use this for market research. So I mean, as I mentioned just now, you can, if you are, you can only an A+. So basically, maybe I should just mention the different GSP programs. And there's a little description here, which used to be a fairly long list, but we've made it into, concertina type, blend in and blend out. Guide to classification codes and preference program indicator. Just a small guide to help you with your queries here. So the GSP status, there's the A, all GSP products, sorry, all GSP countries. A+, only the LDCs, least developed beneficiary countries, and A* are those where there's certain countries that are excluded. But A+, if you're an exporter from South Africa, you can do A+ here, and we'll do another query. So it needs to be AGOA and A+. So these products that are A+ are those that only least developed countries would benefit from if it weren't for AGOA. And because there is no, sorry, if it weren't for AGOA and there's only GSP, only the least developed countries could claim benefits. No other countries, not South Africa under the GSP. And then just the general A, you can also do a query there, and also to see again a comparison. Those products here that have an A and are AGOA eligible would be eligible from South Africa in the absence of AGOA. So they fall under the general GSP scheme and they fall under AGOA. Both of them are applicable. The US importer can use either, except at the moment when there's no GSP. But if the GSP gets reauthorized, theoretically they can use both, or practically they can use both. I would advise against using a GSP if you can avoid it because of this issue of reauthorization. Rather use AGOA and let the US importer claim that duty-free status right away. And that is something you can use in your discussions, in your meetings with your, the B2B meetings we mentioned early on. That is something really important that you can bring up. You have a program, you have a product, you've done your research, and do your research here as well and indicate to the buyer that the product is AGOA eligible and what is the GSP status. Doesn't matter what the status is at the moment. Tell them there is no GSP at the moment. So AGOA gives that very important preferential advantage, preference margin, big advantage over other countries, sourcing from other countries, because there's no GSP. If there is a GSP, you can also mention to them, normally only an LDC country would be eligible for duty-free access, but because of AGOA, the importer can also enter it into the United States or clear it through customs on a duty-free basis. So you can play around with these permutations, these conditional queries. Yes, it must be AGOA, and it must be a GSP or must not be GSP, or it must be GSP only for LDC countries, and so on and so forth. It allows you to do to get quite a bit of market or extract information that you can present to your buyers in terms of how they can benefit from it, because the US buyer, and with no disrespect to any clearing agent on the United States side, but the fact that so many imports from African countries, including from South Africa, jewelry, for example, there's a lot, we are exporting South Africa is exporting about $400 million in 2022 worth of jewelry, gold jewelry into the United States under AGOA. Quite a bit of that, or it is all eligible under AGOA. Quite a bit of it is coming under GSP. those goods will not have obtained duty-free clearance. So it's a deferred clearance, or rather not a deferred clearance, a deferred duty saving that they will get at some stage in future if the GSP and when the GSP gets reauthorized, and if the GSP provision says those goods cleared under GSP in the interim, while the GSP was unauthorized or not reauthorized by Congress, can now make a claim for that import duty that they paid at the time of the last 2 years. But it's not an ideal situation. The importer wants to be competitive and wants to get the best price now, not at some future stage, because it's very difficult doing business, not knowing whether you're going to get those 20% back at some point in future and when that has happened. And it's cash and capital and so on tied up in it. And ultimately, the importer is probably going to make the exporter responsible for it. They're going to say, exporter, drop your prices by 15% because we are having to pay 15% import duty. And but we need your product to be competitive, so let's meet somewhere halfway or whatever. It's not ideal. Tell them it is eligible under GOA and that claim for duties can be made right away. So again, I don't think this really truly does it justice. You need a bit of time to play around with this, but use your product that you are potentially exporting. Either put HTS codes in here, put a description in or keyword in here, find your product and look around those products, what others are paying or would have to pay. What is the general duty? If your US importer sources from elsewhere, they have to pay that duty. What is the GOA status? What is the GSP status at the moment? Irrespective of the GSP status, there is no GSP to claim to be made at the moment. Point these things out to the US importer, because the GOA is what gives you that special foot in the door and means the US importer does not have to pay import duties on those goods if they are GOA eligible and have a D indicator. I didn't mention earlier on the textiles and clothing. These, and I'm just mentioning it now, just in case there's a textiles and clothing exporter or producer here in the room. The HS classification code D, or the special program indicator, has not been added to textiles and apparel because they are subject to special rules of origin provisions. They're actually under Chapter 98. There are special provisions where you import according to the rules of origin category, not necessarily the normal Chapter 6102 or whatever the code might be for that product, and they do not have that D, but they are still GOA eligible. And obviously the other criteria is that the product has to have this wearing apparel provisions system in place, like most GOA countries do have in place, and they've had it since the early 2000s. So that's generally not an issue, certainly not an issue in South Africa and any of these regional countries, but just something to bear in mind. You can do a search purely for apparel or textile goods because they are subject to different rules. So we've differentiated that a little bit in this database. But certainly GOA is D and the GSP is A. But keep an eye on the GOA status and use this as a secondary query tool only for purposes of strengthening your argument with the US importer of why they should be buying from you and not from another country that is normally is normally GSP eligible, because the GSP is expired at the moment. And then going forward, when the GSP gets reauthorized, be aware, use this information to know that your competitors in another country can claim duty-free status, or those goods are subject to duty-free status when imported into the United States, because now the GSP has been reauthorized. And if it is a plus product, it's all countries that are GSP eligible. If it's a S-star, then it is only the least developed countries that can claim, or products from least developed countries that can claim preference status. And in the interest of time, in fact, just half a minute maybe. If you navigate to the top of the to the menus here, this first column here under About GOA, there's the fourth or fifth or sixth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth sub-menu item, United States tariff schedule by chapter. Okay, you can click on that and download all of the chapters, and you can see what it's about. So this here, again, it links directly to the United States International Trade Commission database. It is not something just reposted or republished. These are the original files that download off the US ITC server, and you can use those to read the notes on your product and whether the notes provide guidance on how to classify the product. It is really quite important not to get this wrong. And one small little new section that's been added actually the other day, CBP classifications, origin, and AGO eligibility rulings. Again, as you do if you are battling on how to classify correctly your product, have a look at previous rulings that clarify how certain products need to be classified, that clarify the GO status, that clarify whether the rules of origin have been met, whether the product has been substantially transformed. And then there are also a couple of links here. How can you obtain a ruling if you're unclear? And if you need to be sure before you embark on this export process that that product will be treated in a certain way by US Customs based on a binding ruling letter and a clarification. So the details are in these links. They actually link straight to the US Customs and Border, but it's just there's so much information on their side. This just takes a couple of important links and makes it easy for you to find them. Thank you very much for that, and thanks for your patience. I've gone over my time again. Thank you.
Thanks, Eckhard. As usual, quite detailed and insightful. I think these things are quite hard to summarize because they're so in depth and there's so much information when it comes to looking at them. But thank you so much. I don't see there is something. No, it was a question here regarding samples and freight, more for Rowan, so it wasn't for you. But yeah, I think the key on this is to utilize the site. Please don't be shy of using it. It's there for you to use. You've got to jump on it. You've got to try and work it. If it doesn't work out for you, that's what we're here for. Give us a shout. We'll try to help you out with it. If we can't, then we will get hold of Eckhard and ensure that he's giving advice on what is not coming up. It could just be a terminology thing that you're dealing with. So that is exactly why the customer service support program is here for you. But other than that, thank you very much, Eckhard. Thank you. Great to have you on board again, and thanks to all of our other speakers today. Yeah, really insightful information coming through, and really good to know it's not all that completely daunting. Obviously, there's a process to go through, but it can be done. So do not shy away from exporting your products to the US. There's a lot of people ready to help you and get you into the market. So please make sure to utilize our services. I've shared the link on the chat, but we will also be reaching out to all of you after this, and trying to set up some calls and assistance with that. But thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think that's it for today.